Lord of Industrialization. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 251 Duke Wesen is coming. The ancient capital, a majestic and magnificent city, boasts a bustling scene of traffic and boats, a scene of natural beauty and a vibrant atmosphere. Thick clouds have hung over Constantinople for over a month, bringing a steady downpour of rain. Colorful mushrooms have sprouted from the doors and window frames of some houses. Inside the palace, a man weighing over 300 pounds paced restlessly, denting the soft wool carpet. The slave girl in charge of the incense burner lit a tranquilizing incense stick, and its gentle fragrance soon filled every corner of the palace. But this didn't seem to calm Phocas. Instead, he grabbed the slave girl and threw her out of the palace gates. The slave girl rolled several times on the ground, and the incense burner flew in her wake, striking her on the forehead. The slave girl, her face covered in blood, climbed to her feet. She bowed respectfully toward the palace, ignoring the blood that had already spread across her white neck, then took the incense burner and left. Before the cleaning slaves had even finished sweeping the incense ash from the floor, a tin can arrived at the palace and reported to the emperor, "Your Majesty, the Griffin Knights are finished. All the griffins have been beheaded." Atop the emperor's golden throne, Phocas's expression instantly darkened. He lifted the slave girl he'd been using to vent his frustration and hurled it at the tin can. With a crackling sound of a skull, the tin can was driven back repeatedly, finally crashing with a clang outside the palace gates. He abandoned the slave girl's body and fled. The other slave girls in the palace lowered their heads, fearing they would be next. Soon after, 6 squads of cavalry rushed out of the palace, carrying banners carrying orders. Near the harbor, a group of dock workers sat bored under an awning. Some laid down to reduce their workload, while others gathered to play cards. The rules were too complex for them, so they settled for the simplest game of big-small. In the past, the harbor would have been filled with cargo ships, and despite their toil, their meager income was enough to support their families. The harbor was much emptier these days, with only a few ships docking. More and more were leaving, some even leaving empty, leaving the workers without work. Alice sighed a bald man, then rolled a pair of 2s. "When will this ever end?" The scarred man next to him rolled a pair of 4s and sighed. "There's no work now, beans are expensive again, and with family and children, life is unbearable." The bearded man, who rolled a pair of 5s, sighed and said nothing. Then, after rolling a pair of 10s and 3 triples with a pair of 2s, the one-eyed man said helplessly, "Don't even mention you. We're in a tough spot too. You don't have money, and I can't collect it, but the boss up there is still collecting it." The bearded man suddenly said mysteriously, "Did you hear? The Griffin Knight's base has been destroyed." Some of the other 3 were surprised, while others looked calm. Scarface played cards and shook his head. "So what? My family is going to starve anyway. You can go to the cathedral." The bearded man said to him, "The church is giving out steam bread now. You can get it as long as you go. My family has been there for 2 days, and I heard it will continue for a long time." The bald man nodded and said, "Yes, I went there yesterday too. There were quite a few people going, and the queue was very long." Then he stretched out his right hand to show Scarface, and said, "Look, if you go to get it, you have to put a print on your hand. You can get a maximum of 5 days supply at a time, and one person can get a maximum of 15 days supply." Scarface saw 5 blue dots printed on the back of his hand, and asked him in surprise, "Which master is so kind?" The bearded man and the bald man stopped talking immediately. Instead, the one-eyed man looked around and whispered, "Who else could it be? It's His Royal Highness Prince Dragaces." Scarface opened his mouth in shock, but he quickly reacted and said worriedly, "Is there going to be a war? Whoever eats his food will have to help him fight. Are you worthy of it?" The one-eyed man looked at him with disdain. "Do you know who the prince asked for help?" Scarface shook his head. He didn't even know there was food on the church, let alone such a thing. The one-eyed man smiled complacently, looked around, and then whispered, "You have heard of the Duke of Wesen in the upper reaches of the Danube and Rhine rivers, right? He is the apprentice of Lord Richardnal. He is 8 feet tall and has a waist of 8 feet. Taking the head of an enemy general in the midst of thousands of troops is like taking something from his pocket. He led 800 people to kill 100,000 people by the Elbe River, and then ran to the city of Hama, which was dozens of kilometers away, to kill a king. His neighboring countries had been fighting for several years. He called the two kings and asked if they could give him face, and then the two countries dared not fight again. You know, the army of Duke Wesson is not simple either. Those are demons from hell. They look like humans at ordinary times, but when they arrive on the battlefield, they become big-eyed and long-faced. Their skin is so dark that even a knife can't cut through it. Hey, play your cards quickly. Scarface was so dumbfounded that he forgot to play the cards in his hand. That's a demon, he said incredulously. The church doesn't care, haha. One Eye chuckled dismissively. It seems you don't know. Duke Wesson is actually a messenger of the god of light. Angels possess him, and those demons are all influenced by him. Scarface was stunned by this. At the other's urging, he played his cards and said, "So, His Royal Highness Prince Dragaces is coming back." "Yes," One Eye nodded. "I heard their fleet will land here. Everyone, be smart and run home if you see anything wrong." Scarface thought for a moment and said, "Forget it. I'd better leave the city and stay with my wife for a while. I'll come back once I'm settled." Bearded Man agreed, "I was thinking the same thing. I'll go to the cathedral and ask if I can get some steamed bread for the journey." "Hey, Win." Just as they were shuffling their cards, an accident occurred near the harbor. Boom! A violent explosion erupted in a military camp near the harbor, sending clouds of white smoke visible from far away. A salted fish dropped from the sky and smacked the bald man's head, turning his scalp red. They and the other dock workers dared not stay any longer and fled, leaving their poker behind. The massive explosion plunged Constantine into chaos, and pedestrians on the street immediately ran for their homes. Moments later, another military camp behind the western city wall exploded, and a heavy barley rain fell. Rumors soon spread throughout the city that the troops of Prince Dragaces and Duke Wesson had entered the city, all dressed in black helmets and armor, mourning the late emperor. Chapter 252 Action begins. 1033, 3 hours before sunrise, a sudden flash of light appeared on the pitch-black sea. From afar, it looked like a smaller sun about to rise. Frederick stood atop the observation tower of the Flying Tulip, observing the ship's preparations through a telescope. With the landing on Magiabeo imminent, the ships were on combat duty, and everyone took up their positions. 100 meters to either side of him, the flat-tops Lexington and Saratoga were ablaze with lights, their horizontal decks swaying slightly. Sailors in white sailor uniforms were carrying bombs to the gondolas of the hot airships. Wesson airmen in sky blue uniforms were loading the bombs into the gondolas' bomb droppers. Nearby, officers monitored the progress of the airship's airbag heating, while others started the two engines at the rear of the gondolas. Many of the students and teachers who had escaped Constantine were involved in this operation. Some had joined the Wesson army, while others had come as non-staff personnel to provide support. Among these, Diesel held the highest position. Diesel's invention, the jet canister, the core component of the P-gun, is arguably the cornerstone of the Wesson army. After his research on the jet cannon failed to yield the desired results, he shifted his focus and, inspired by the piston of a steam engine, finally completed a groundbreaking invention, the gas explosion engine. This engine's principle is that the P-gun's jet canister propels a piston instead of a bullet. Like a diesel engine, a gas explosion engine weighs many times less than a steam engine of equivalent horsepower, leading to significant price cuts and discounts on steam engines under 50 horsepower in Wesson State. Diesel has now officially launched a small batch of 10 20 horsepower gas explosion engines, all used in 2 hot airships. He has also been there to address any operational issues. Frederick watched as the hot airship's airbag gradually inflated, revealing a ferocious pattern of eyes and shark-like teeth on its head. In this age of fireball magic, Frederick dared not pursue a hydrogen airship. Unable to produce helium, hot airships were the only option. The lift efficiency of an airship varies depending on the gas in its envelope. Hydrogen is approximately 10.8 nm, helium is approximately 9.8 nm, and hot air is only about 2.9 nm. The Wesson State Air Force's hot air airships are currently nearly 50 meters long and 15 meters in diameter, with a total airbag volume of 4,000 meters. They are designed to have a maximum takeoff weight of 1,000 kilograms and a payload of 400 kilograms. Using anti-gravity magic derived from the winged hussars, the weight can be reduced to 800 kilograms. In calm air, the flight speed is approximately 20 kilometers per hour. To accommodate larger payloads, the airships are piloted by lightweight female soldiers. Soon after, two female voices rang out over the radio beside Frederick. Kirov 1, reporting. Kirov 2, reporting. Then Helmut's voice rang out, command received. All Kirov airships are under the command of the Air Force commander. According to the pre-war line of command, the landing operation was to be commanded by Staff Officer Helmut, with Minister of War Franz the Younger and Prince Dragaces commanding the landing forces. The Air Force was under the unified command of Frederick, with Hayrid assisting Helmut in command of all ships. Frederick immediately began issuing orders. Dawn will take command of the Air Force. Kirov 1 and 2 will take off. Dawn and Rose will be up in 5 minutes for reconnaissance. Then, Marie's excited voice echoed over the radio. Rose, understood. Frederick jumped down from the watchtower and onto the deck. Dawn was already ready. Seeing him approach, she came over and nudged his cheek. Frederick and Marie were not to carry out the main combat mission today. Their mission was to conduct aerial reconnaissance of the area surrounding Magiabeo. Besides simple weapons, Dawn had only a radio on the back seat of her saddle. Frederick rode on Dawn, turned around and waved to Lulu in the cockpit, then took off. The temperature at sea was a little low before sunrise, and Frederick tightened the collar of his leather jacket to keep the cold air out. Not long after, a dark figure appeared beside him. Mary arrived riding her fire dragon named Rose. There were some points of light on the distant coast. The lower ones were the lights on the walls of Magiabeo City, and the higher ones were the lights of the castle on the high ground inside the city. Frederick's radio kept receiving reports from the airship. The heat is at its best. The airship is ready, Frederick ordered. Target the military camp outside Magiabeo Castle. Blanket bombing. Start the action. Not long after, the airship replied. Direction received. Propeller started. There was a light breeze at this time, with a wind speed of about 15 kilometers per hour. The departure position was upwind, and the two airships flew towards the target at a high speed at an altitude of 500 meters. As Frederick and Mary reached the front of the fleet, 5 paddle steamers equipped with artillery began to advance, their mission to bombard the coastal walls of Magiabeo. Behind them, the fleet extinguished their lights, leaving only warning lights on to avoid collisions, and began to set sail at half sail. Frederick and Mary separated in the air not far from Magiabeo, with Frederick responsible for scouting the city while Mary was in charge of the surrounding areas. The entire city was still asleep, and the soldiers on the city walls were still dozing. No one noticed the winged unicorn and fire dragon in the sky. Frederick took out his telescope and scanned the city streets from the air. There were few streetlights, and the city defenders on night patrol were all heading towards the barracks outside the castle. A few thieves took advantage of this opportunity to climb through the windows. The barracks were quiet and dark, without even streetlights. If it weren't for the castle as a reference, it would have been difficult to spot. Frederick tuned his radio to a specific frequency and said, "The wardrobe dances at midnight." A voice followed shortly after, "But is it dancing for the dresser or the candlestick?" The code was correct, and members of the Black Hats, already lurking in the city, immediately reported the latest situation. The latest update revealed nothing new. The Emperor had summoned the Lord of Magiabeo 2 weeks ago to Constantia to defend against the impending Wesson army, taking with him all the smaller lords and most of the army in the entire Mahe River Valley. Weather-wise, the northeast wind had been blowing for the past few days, and the sky had cleared, with bright sunshine during the day. The river had dropped slightly, and the height between the river and the bridge was high enough for small ships to pass. However, the surrounding roads were still muddy, making it difficult for large forces to move. The Black Cats had already arrived at their designated location in the city, and the whereabouts of key figures were known, allowing them to move at any time. Frederick, after listening to their instructions, instructed them to proceed according to plan and prepare target designations for the airstrike on the military camp. Less than 2 hours before sunrise, the Kirov airships flew over the city wall one after another at an altitude of 500 meters. Chapter 253. You will be able to stand on your own in the future. At the darkest hour of the day, streaks of sparks shot up into the night sky, and moments later, a dozen dazzling balls of light illuminated the military camp in Magiabeo City. Those inside were baffled as to what was happening. No one suspected an enemy attack. Instead, some wondered who had offended the magician, prompting such revenge. Those awakened pulled their blankets over their heads and went back to sleep. Those standing guard or using the restroom looked up to see a white patch of sky, their eyes hurting. They cursed and covered their eyes. Target confirmed, approaching, bombardiers, take positions, bomb bays ready. Caravans descended to an altitude of about 300 meters, passing over the military camp from left to right. Inside the pods were simple bomb sights, essentially graduated telescopes, looking vertically toward the ground. The assistant bombardier, holding a pocket watch, counted down the seconds from 8, while the bombardier estimated the lead time for the bombs and periodically instructed the pilot to adjust their course. As the bombardier flipped the release switch, each 20 kilograms aerial bomb left the bomb bay, free-falling for 8.1 seconds before impacting the barracks below. Violent explosions echoed in succession, like the thunderbolts of the god of light raining down upon the earth as punishment for sinners. The airship, having dropped its bombs, suddenly gained considerable height, reported to Frederick, and turned back, leaving behind 2 lines of shattered, burning ruins. The bombing of the barracks served as a signal for action elsewhere. Some of the senior officers of the city defense forces were resting at home, some were with their lovers, and still others had just retired to sleep in the baths. The Wesson Army's Black Cats, already aware of their whereabouts, began their decapitation operation. A side door to a mansion was blown open, and a squadron of black-clad men rushed in at top speed. Babbo, following his captain, rushed through the garden, armed not only with ordinary weapons but also with thick shields. They reached the building, but instead of entering through the door, they used the ladder to break into the master bedroom on the second floor via the balcony. Their target was the current commander of the city defense forces, and they were careful not to harm his family, as his wife came from a prominent local family. Babbo, a stonemason, had gained considerable strength after years of training, and even with his shield strapped to his back, he easily leaped onto the balcony. After his teammates blasted open the balcony door, Babbo rushed in, shield in hand, a dazzling light emanating from the front. The target was already prepared, weapon drawn, ready to repel the robbers, but was blinded by the sudden burst of light. Seizing this momentary opportunity, Babbo emptied his revolver into him. As the gunfire ceased, the other 2 comrades had already entered the bedroom and rushed over to fire back. Having confirmed their target's elimination, they quickly exited the mansion and vanished into the city. The target's wife still shivered under her blankets. In less than half an hour, more than half of the remaining defenders in Magiabeo were wiped out, and the upper echelons were completely annihilated, leaving only the barracks along the city walls and the troops within the castle. As daylight rose, 5 paddle steamers arrived at their designated position and began their assault on the city walls. Although the undulating sea surface affected the accuracy of their fire, it was no problem against a large target of the city wall, which they quickly breached. Several ships quickly rushed ashore, and Dragaces was the first to jump off, followed by his 2,000 Restoration Army soldiers in black uniforms. The Restoration Army rushed towards the breach in the city wall, encountering no resistance. The defenders had already fled when they saw the fleet at sea before the bombardment. Franz the Younger then landed with a regiment and took over the city wall and the harbor. Dragaces was freed up, leading the Restoration Army straight to the castle. At noon, Frederick and Mary landed in the open space in front of the castle, and professionals immediately arrived to take Dawn and the fire dragon to eat. Mary took off her helmet and saw the eagle and double-headed eagle flags already hoisted from the castle. She sighed, "I didn't expect it would be so easy to capture this city." "How could it be easy?" Frederick smiled and shook his head. "If the enemy's main force hadn't been diverted, if the last landing exercise hadn't nearly gone awry, this battle would have been fought, and perhaps even more people would have died at the hands of our own people." Traditional armies of that era were united around their generals, their fighting spirit pegged to their leaders. Without their leaders, ordinary armies would lose their morale and become a loose sand, falling apart on their own. This battle targeted precisely this point. By removing the enemy's leaders and carrying out decapitation operations, they completely undermined their morale, making the battle as easy as cutting through tofu with a steel knife. Dragaces had invited the castle's former owners to the manor outside the city, now managed by the guard battalion. Frederick's arrival was followed by his bodyguard, Tony. Mary and he followed Tony to the castle's dining room, which would serve as the headquarters. Helmut had already arrived with his staff. Franz Jr., Dragaces, and Hayridin were studying a map at the dining table. Frederick approached and said to Franz Jr., "You'll be in command from now on. Call me if you need aerial reconnaissance." "Huh?" Franz Jr. was stunned, clearly unresponsive. Frederick replied, "What? It's settled. Fight as you wish. Go ahead. I won't interfere." He then solemnly addressed Franz Jr. and Helmut. "I'll need at least 2 or 3 capable commanders in the future. You two, and Eugene, are both talented individuals I believe in. If you don't take advantage of the enemy's weakness and gain experience now, when will you?" Franz Jr., Helmut, and Eugene, who was counting the casualties of Wessen's army, 2 men sprained their ankles while disembarking, and 33 men lost their combat effectiveness due to severe seasickness, their faces flushed with excitement. Eugene put down his pen, stood up, and said a little embarrassedly, "Commander, you think too highly of me. I've only caused you trouble once since I joined the army." Frederick said to him seriously, "Don't underestimate yourself. You have an advantage none of us have now. You've experienced a truly devastating defeat, and even in that devastating defeat, you were able to lead your troops almost intact, maintaining their fighting capacity. I've always believed that the strength of an army isn't measured by how it wins, but by how it loses. We've been victorious all along, which is a good thing, but it also presents a hidden danger. If we suffer a setback, our confidence will likely crumble, our morale will collapse, and we'll be easier to catch than pigs." The staff officers present thought their leader's words made sense. If they didn't, they were surely mistaken. Drageses looked at Frederick with envy. People who are both capable and trustworthy are incredibly rare. Previously, states were overthrown because those they trusted were incapable of causing trouble, and then those who were capable but lacked loyalty seized the opportunity to usurp the throne. Those 3 people Frederick just mentioned, not to mention that little Franz grew up with him, Helmut joined halfway, and Eugene had been there for less than 2 months, yet he could actually trust them completely and let them do their thing. Such a person is either a fool or a genius. Frederick finished speaking and slipped away to feed the dawn. On the way, he asked his guard Tony, "Do you want to lead a team out to fight on your own?" "No." Tony shook his head and refused. "I just want to protect the commander." Frederick didn't force it, and said, "The Ministry of Military Affairs thinks you can be knighted. Let's do it after this battle." Chapter 254, A Walk in the City. The fighting caused little damage to Magiabeo, and since it was Drageses' restoration army that arrived to appease the people, the citizens quickly settled down. Frederick also specially arranged for some handsome and articulate Wesson soldiers, some of whom had previously studied in Constantinople, to be sent to the city. He gave them money and allowed them to spend their money there. It soon became known in Magiabeo that the Wesson soldiers were talented, handsome, well-spoken, and able to speak Pulse with authentic Constantinople accent. Frederick encouraged his soldiers to learn foreign languages, and since they would be fighting alongside Drageses and his men, he started with Pulse. By afternoon, the streets began to fill up. Bread and other food vendors posted notices demanding that prices remain the same as yesterday for 10 days, or they would be thrown into the sea with a stone. Those hoarding goods would be tied to 2 stones. Frederick and Tony strolled through the streets, relieved to see the market was relatively stable and that there seemed no need for a public security war. It would be a lie for Frederick to say he wasn't nervous for the first battle of the day. He still felt a bit apprehensive, so he chatted with Tony to relax. "By the way, I heard you got married a few days before you left? Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Tony blushed instantly. He stammered, trying to find an excuse. Frederick knew immediately. They must have gotten on the bus first and then paid for the ticket. He sighed. "You're not going to get beaten to death by your parents-in-law. While people might be more relaxed about having children these days, childbirth is a sacred act, not to be messed with." Despite Frederick's fraught time in Wayne, he didn't keep any of his children. "Almost," Tony said sheepishly. "Lena's mentor is Professor Manuel, and he's a ruthless killer." Frederick's curiosity burned brightly. He knew Manuel's children were in Wesson, but when did this guy have a female apprentice? "Tell me quickly," he asked curiously, "how did you hook up with Manuel's apprentice?" Tony said even more embarrassedly, "I have known Lena for a long time. At that time, I came to join the commander. When I arrived in Ansbach, I had run out of money and had nothing to eat. Lena was a waitress in a tavern at that time. She secretly gave me some leftovers, so I didn't starve to death. It was she who suggested that I participate in the night competition. As long as I could register and pass the preliminary selection, I would have a place to stay and food to eat." Lena owed the gang 3 florins at that time. "I got the championship prize and wanted to help her pay off the debt. Who knew that she offended the gang a few nights ago and ran away?" 2 years later, One day Master Psyche asked me to go to the dairy to buy milk for her. I happened to see Lena at the dairy, and that's how we got in touch. I heard her say that the night before the night conference that year, the gang asked her to help Poison, but she refused, so she hid in a carriage and ran away with her sister. That day, the carriage stopped at the dairy in Hausen. When she emerged, she happened to meet Professor Manuel's wife. After hearing their story, she took them in to work at the dairy. Not long after, Professor Manuel and Master Psyche went to the dairy in Hausen to study disinfection magic. Master Psyche discovered that Lena and her sister had a talent for necromancy. So she allowed them to study with Professor Manuel. Later, Professor Manuel saw that they were indeed talented and hard-working, so he took them in as his apprentices. Frederick listened as he walked, feeling that Psyche's appearances seemed unusually frequent. However, he didn't delve into the details, letting the old man do what he wanted. The two quickly reached the commercial district when someone approached Frederick from the opposite direction. Tony immediately stepped forward, with several guards behind him protecting the rear and sides. The visitor was a merchant who came to Wessenland to purchase small hardware for sale. Frederick had previously spoken to him during his inspection of the hardware market. He said to Frederick through Tony, "Your Excellency, Duke, how wonderful to see you." Seeing his anxious expression, Frederick said, "I remember you. I spoke to you last year at the hardware market, and it was even featured in the newspaper." The merchant excitedly exclaimed, "Thank you, Your Excellency, for remembering me." Frederick asked, "What can I do for you?" The merchant replied, "Well, the port is closed, and our ship can't sail. I didn't ask Your Excellency when the closure will be lifted, but I was wondering if you would ask for some financial support." He was being tactful. A large army conquering a place inevitably exploits the land, and merchants like them, who are not from other places, are naturally the most lucrative. Frederick sneered, "You only have so much money, and you still import your goods from me. Would I be a fool to rob you? Wouldn't it be easier for me to just ship a few ships of goods over at factory price and sell them to you?" The merchant breathed a sigh of relief. It was truly wonderful that they didn't care about his meager wealth. Frederick continued, "His Royal Highness Prince Dragaces is in charge of this political matter. He's a poor fellow, you know what I mean." The merchant's face paled, sweat streaking his forehead. Just because Duke Wesson didn't grab it didn't mean Duke Dragaces wouldn't. He could avoid it once, but he couldn't. Frederick stepped forward and smacked the man in the butt, angrily saying, "What are you thinking? I've shown you a clear path, but you won't take it. Why don't you go back and discuss it with the others?" He was speechless. Political investment is always the most profitable. Previously, people from Constantinople had provided Dragaces with funds under false pretenses. Once Dragaces was restored, these people would surely profit greatly. They had missed the opportunity to provide timely assistance, but now was the time to add icing on the cake. If they didn't seize it, there would be no chance later. Fortunately, one of the merchants understood this and, before dinner time, gathered a large sum of money and sent it to the castle for Dragaces' military expenses. Frederick also received a share. There was no time for a banquet, so Dragaces and the others enjoyed a military dinner. It was simple. Each person received a bottle of happy water, a serving of instant noodles with red tomato beef, a bowl of vegetable soup with condensed broth, a can of braised pork, and a braised egg. Despite this simple meal, the merchants felt honored to see the prince enjoying the same meal as they did. This was Dragaces' turn. Frederick, instead of joining in the fun, took Marie to the city's best seafood restaurant for a sumptuous salted fish feast. The restaurant owner, resigned to his fate, told Frederick, "No fishing boats can go out to sea this morning. All we have in the city is salted fish." Frederick had no choice but to accept the salted fish. "You can go out to sea the day after tomorrow morning," he told the owner. "Just tell the fishermen to stay away from the fleet." The war was still having an impact on the city, and if they didn't want to engage in a security war, they had to minimize the negative impact. Chapter 255 Jump over like a frog. "Would you like a cup of refreshing tea?" Helmut placed a cup of steaming hot coffee next to little Franz. As the trade between Frederick and Madame Sophie intensified, more and more local specialties from the southern continent appeared in the cups and dishes of Wesson State. Little Franz picked up the coffee cup and took a big sip. The coffee was added with some condensed milk and a lot of sugar, which could not only refresh him but also provide a lot of nutrition for his high-speed brain. His brows were slightly furrowed, and his eyes never left the map on the table. The map depicted the lowlands of the Mahe River Valley and the surrounding terrain. Several large red arrows went upstream from the mouth of the Mahe River next to the city of Magiabeo, pointing directly to several larger towns on the river bank. Each town had several small red arrows pointing to the surrounding villages. Helmut stood by and asked, "You look nervous." Little Franz replied, "How can I not be nervous? The commander actually gave me command of this battle. What if something goes wrong?" Helmut smiled and said, "Why don't you report to the commander and let me take command?" Little Franz turned and looked at him seriously. "If you have nothing else to do, you can go see if the manure has been shoveled off the war horses." "What did the fortune teller say?" Speaking of work, Helmut stopped joking and answered seriously, "The divination still says there will be a heavy rain in 5 to 7 days. Little Franz's brow furrowed even more. He had memorized every line on the map. According to the map, it would take at least 10 days to conquer all the major towns in the area by advancing east to west from the estuary upstream. However, due to the rising river waters caused by the new rains, many bridges upstream would likely be impassable. "Let's change the battle plan," Franz Jr. said suddenly. "We won't have to capture one city before setting out to capture the next." The commander once said that when we have the advantage of mobility, we can jump over worthless or difficult to capture areas like a frog. Helmut immediately said, "But the towns along the river are important." Franz Jr. nodded and said, "They are all important, but none of them can pose a threat to our fleet." Then change the order of attack. The troops attacking the westernmost town will enter the estuary first, and then go upstream, regardless of the towns along the way, to reach the target. The order of entering the estuary will be based on the assigned targets, from west to east, regardless of towns outside the target. Helmut looked at the map, estimated the time, nodded, and said, "I think it's okay. This way, we can launch attacks on all targets at almost the same time, which can reduce the time by almost half." Seeing that he agreed, Franz Jr. said, "Then let's do it." Helmut took out a small notebook, wrote down his latest orders, and arranged for the relevant staff to formulate a new plan. He complained, "The commander is right. It's true that the leaders only talk, and the workers run themselves ragged. We're going to have to drag some people out of bed." Little Franz ignored his complaints and pointed south. "The most important thing now is to hold the land route to the south. Who do you think should be in charge?" As long as Phocas didn't have Alzheimer's, he would definitely send troops to recapture the lost territory. This was not just a military issue, but also a political one. Currently, Phocas and his 80,000-man army were assembled in Constantinople. They lacked sufficient ships, so the only way to attack was by land. The direction of the march for 8 men was not important, but the route for 80,000 was crucial. The only land route into the Mahe region from the south was a relatively flat mountain pass, with a main road and just enough space and water. According to the plan, the Wesson army would attack the Mahe region, then Dragaces would neutralize it. During this period, the Wesson army, commanded by Franz Jr., who also served as division commander, would block the land routes to the south and use positional warfare to wear down any counterattacking enemy forces. Now that Franz Jr. was in overall command, he naturally couldn't remain in the trenches there. Helmut, who needed to lead the general staff, was the only brigade commanders below them, Heinz and Bernd, but both were required to command their own units in the attack on the Mahe region. This presented a problem for the Wesson army, which was short of manpower. Helmut, feeling a bit overwhelmed, pondered for a long time before cautiously saying, "Why not let the commander go?" Franz Jr. pondered and concluded that the commander was the most suitable candidate, considering his availability, ability, and prestige. The problem was that the commander had said at noon that he would only be responsible for aerial reconnaissance. "That's a good idea," Franz Jr. said. "Go and tell the commander now." Helmut's face darkened. It was already late at night, and who knew if the commander and Princess Marie were engaging in a life harmony. No, he immediately shook his head like a rattle. "You should go. You and the commander grew up together, so they won't beat you to death," Little Franz said sternly. "Your Excellency, I order you to fetch the commander." Helmut wanted to strike, but the superior officer had the final say. He had given the order, so he had to obey. Reluctantly, he turned to leave when he saw a trainee on duty chuckling. He ordered, "Metzger, fetch the commander." Metzger was stunned, looking at the staff officer with a resentful look. Helmut smiled and said, "You always say you have a good relationship with the commander and that you are his mentor. Tony and the others won't think you'd assassinate him. This mission is perfect for you." Metzger looked around. As a trainee, He had the final say. He was the lowest ranking officer, so what else could he say? Within 5 minutes, Metzger returned, smiling, with Frederick following behind him. As soon as Frederick entered the headquarters, Franz Jr. asked, "Commander, am I disturbing you?" Frederick walked over and gave both him and Helmut a slap on the buttocks. Since leaving Wine City, Frederick and his sister had only cuddled and kissed, never achieving a complete harmony of life. He still understood the importance of caution during a march and battle. "What's the matter?" Frederick asked, stepping over to the map. Franz Jr. recounted what he had just discussed with Helmut and the new orders, then asked him to take charge of the southern front. Frederick pondered. At this stage of the campaign, the southern blocking corps was the strongest, possessing a significant portion of the Western Army's technical equipment. Furthermore, the enemy it faced was unprecedentedly formidable. The East Plain Empire's strength far outweighed the combined forces of the Earls and the army led by the Mere Crown Prince Casimir. The enemy's mage corps was even more formidable, and it wasn't ruled out that the magic gods hired by Phocas over the past 2 years would accompany the troops. The Western army wasn't particularly intimidated by the Sword Saint this time, as Richardon would be joining them, allowing him to contain 2 beings of the same level. Psyche had been organizing several annual meetings of the Western Scientific Society, so she wasn't accompanying them this time. However, she had given Frederick a little trick that could be used to intimidate the enemy if necessary. Similar exercises had been conducted several times before, with Psyche and Richardon also joining the Whetstone force, and the entire army felt no significant psychological pressure. By establishing positions in the right locations, the disparity in troop strength could be bridged. Therefore, Frederick trusted young Franz to win this battle. "That's okay," Frederick told young Franz. "The battle along the coast is primarily political. Helmut can coordinate and command here, while Prince Dragaces will handle the political aspects. You can command the southern front without any problem. I'll go with you to the southern front, too. If you're no longer able to, I'll take over." He was determined to train young Franz and Helmut, so he naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity. He would simply go and stabilize the morale of the troops. A higher-ranking official can crush a lower-ranking official. Frederick said so, and little Franz had no choice but to do so. Chapter 256 The Enemy's New Weapons. "I think this place is good," Eugene pointed to the foot of the mountain and said, "The main road is uphill here. On the left is a mountain that is difficult for large troops to pass through. Although the mountain on the right is not steep, there are 2 large lakes there, which restrict the enemy's movements. The small hill by the lake is relatively steep. We can set up a flank position there and attack the enemy from the flank. The space between the 2 positions can be used as a cavalry passage." This time the Southern Front Corps focused on defense, so Eugene, who had experience in defensive warfare, was brought here, and half of the staff came with him. Little Franz agreed with his plan and was about to give the order when Frederick asked, "Why not set up the flank position on the higher mountain on the left?" "It's steeper there," Eugene immediately replied. "It's precisely because the mountain is too high that once we are surrounded, our supply lines will be cut off, especially the water source. There is a lake behind the small hill on the right, so the water source is guaranteed and we are not afraid of being completely surrounded." Frederick nodded, turned to a group of staff officers behind him who had different opinions and said, "Did you hear that? We can't just choose positions based on the book. The Southern Front Corps built its positions based on the terrain." A battalion of the cavalry regiment and scouts went forward for reconnaissance. The artillery began to determine the firing area. Frederick and Richardon were fishing by the lake. Richardon told Frederick about their actions in Constantinople. "The army of Constantinople has been indulging in pleasure in recent years. Officers openly bring their mistresses into the barracks, and the mistresses even beat and scold the soldiers. The Order of the Griffin Knights is managed by Phocas's brother-in-law, Siri. He was once only 1 step away from my level. I'm afraid he won't be able to defeat you in just a few years. At first, I wasn't sure I could attack the Order of the Griffin Knights without being discovered by him. He discovered me even while I was conducting reconnaissance in disguise. He told me to make sure I cut the griffins into smaller pieces when I killed them. In the end, he used the bones of 7 griffins to piece together the remains of 18 griffins and settled the account. The garrison in the city is even more hopeless. Our people bribed the procurement officers of 2 barracks and just smuggled in explosives and wine barrels. We also contacted the royal mages, but there was no progress. Many of the magicians there came from the Ghazi Empire. I suspect Phocas is actually a puppet of the Ghazi Empire." Frederick placed his catch into the fish basket and said in a deep voice, "The latest news is that the Ghazi Empire has arrived. Their naval forces will attack the mouth of the Mar River. A 10,000-man mercenary force has arrived in Constantinople. It's said this force is Emperor Ghazi's Imperial Guard, equipped with the latest weaponry, and originally intended to fight the Kingdom of Kush." This latest intelligence, coming from Madame Sophie's intelligence department, was somewhat time-sensitive. The information stated that the mercenaries had already assembled, and when it reached them yesterday, they had already landed in Constantinople. Richard frowned and asked, "I can't help with a naval battle. Do you have any solutions?" Humans bound by gravity had to struggle in the water even at sea. Even short bursts of flight were insufficient for the ocean. The transport fleet was currently composed primarily of weak merchant ships. Most of the combat-capable vessels had already entered the Mar River area, and they were all Hayreddin's ships. It was unclear how much fighting spirit they possessed. Frederick replied confidently, "I trust Lulu." The best option for Frederick was to seek help from Baron Addition, but he was currently battering pirates in the North Sea, and his fleet wouldn't be able to arrive for a while. The Wesson Army's current naval strength consisted of the flying merchant ship Tulip, the flat-tops Lexington and Saratoga, and 5 riverboats converted into gunboats. Lulu said that was sufficient. Richardner, hearing this, no longer worried. At most, all the ships would retreat to the Mar River, and if the enemy came ashore, they would be dealt a heavy blow. "What about the guards?" he asked. "What do you have in mind?" Frederick replied dismissively, "They should have no trouble against armies from other regions, but against us, hey, their chances of defeating you are slimmer than mine." Meanwhile, in a pasture outside Constantinople, the Ghazi Empire's guards were demonstrating their new weaponry to Phocas and his men. Several guardsmen ripped a waterproof bag open and poured the black powder inside into the barrel of a 90mm cannon. They then placed an iron ball wrapped in soft leather and pressed it down with a corkscrew. After the reloaders left, someone adjusted the muzzle's elevation slightly with a screw and fired. There was a muffled thud, white smoke billowed out, and the entire car slid back 2 meters. From 600 meters away, the screams of sheep could be heard. Someone on horseback quickly counted the dead sheep, using this information to estimate the casualties of the troops arrayed in formation. Phocas smiled broadly when he heard that this single shot would kill at least 30 men. The Ghazi Empire had brought 20 of these bronze cannons, capable of firing 3 times every 2 minutes, which could easily kill nearly 2,000 enemies. He waved his hand, and someone immediately brought a tray of gold coins. He personally handed a handful to Arda, the Ghazi Guard officer leading the charge, and then had the men who had fired the cannon summoned and given a few to each. Arda began planning the next task. The flock was herded closer, and this time, tin cans of shot were stuffed into the barrels, instantly knocking down a large number of the sheep. Phocas's smile widened, and he grabbed a handful of gold coins and stuffed them into Arda's hands. The third task involved a larger barrel, approximately 120 millimeters in caliber. The solid shell instantly collapsed the wall of a cabin 800 meters away. The fourth task involved a team of soldiers armed with muskets. A target made of hardwood planks was set up 50 meters away. This musket was similar in structure to the folding airguns exported from Wesson State. It had 2 15mm barrels, supported by a long bracket on the ground. The barrels were opened and a projectile was inserted into the barrels. The projectile was sealed with a soft leather, and a powder chamber at the other end was filled with gunpowder, which then closed. However, the air tightness of the connection was a problem, and white smoke was emitted in both directions when fired. To prevent the white smoke from reaching the soldiers on either side, the seams at the joints faced forward, so those standing side by side would be safe. The musketeers, under the orders of their officers, reloaded and fired repeatedly, evidently with skill, soon turning the wooden planks into a sieve. "Excellent, excellent." Phocas was delighted by the holes-riddled planks. These muskets were far more powerful than the folding air rifles sold in Wesson, which were only suitable for hunting and were not very effective on the battlefield. In those days, combat relied on the integrity of formations. If one side's formation was broken, massacre would ensue. The new weapons introduced by the Ghazi Empire were precisely targeted at this characteristic. Artillery would disrupt enemy formations from a distance, while muskets would cause confusion in the front lines before engaging the enemy. The infantry would then charge in and slaughter the disorganized enemy. Phocas's men discussed the matter and planned to purchase some muskets for their own use. Someone asked Arda, "How do you make the black powder you use?" Arda shook his head and replied, I don't know. Only the royal alchemists know how to make it. He only knew that the formula for the fire powder had been refined by someone in the palace. He knew nothing else and didn't dare to ask. That evening, Phocas announced in the palace that the entire army would march north in 3 days to recapture the Mahe region. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257 Night Battle. The vast ocean is vast, but the tracks of ships are not without trace. From the perspective of safe navigation, wind direction, currents, reefs, and other conditions can be used to infer a fleet's route. When the Caravans airship launched from the Lexington failed to detect the enemy fleet on the southern coastal route, it indicated that the enemy had chosen to take a gamble and adopt the riskier outer sea route. A long period of southerly winds followed, though currently light, but sufficient for a well-prepared fleet to pass through the area east of the inland sea known as the Dark Sea. Caravans 2 then took off from the Saratoga to search the eastern waters, while Caravans 1 began moving eastward to search the southeast. At this point, it was not Lulu who was in command, but her adjutant, Alfred. Alfred had met Frederick in the mess hall at the Naval Academy and graduated with honors. After graduation, he joined Baron Addition in the pirate wars, quickly becoming a well-known figure in the North Sea. After the launch of the Flying Tulip, Lulu hired him at a substantial fee as her adjutant. Lulu understood that her strength lay in trade, and commanding naval battles was only passable, so she sought out assistants versed in naval warfare. For this battle, she handed Alfred the reins while she ascended the bridge to inspect the progress of the ship's modifications. The ship was abuzz with clanking sounds as carpenters installed weapon launchers on the sides and bow. Although the ship was equipped with 6 jet mortars, the incoming enemy far outnumbered them, so they temporarily transferred a batch of P-shaped Gatling guns and Iron Fist launchers from the troops defending Majiabao City, installing them and specially selecting soldiers who were not prone to seasickness to operate them. A twin-mounted P-shaped Gatling gun was installed at each corner of the bridge, specifically to defend against approaching enemies in small boats. Next to it were Iron Fist individual rocket launchers, designed to deal with larger ships within a range of about 100 meters. These weapons were originally intended for defending the city walls, but Helmut ordered the fleet to install as many as they could. Now, not only the Flying Tulip, but also the flat tops Lexington and Saratoga had been fully assembled. After lunch, Caravans No. 2 spotted a fleet of over 100 three-masted ships sailing north in 2 columns, flying Hayriden's pirate flag, over 100 kilometers to the east. Alfred immediately contacted Hayriden to confirm the information, and then Hayriden, using the Kushish curse word on the radio, spent 10 minutes cursing their old rival, Hedam of the Ghazi Empire. It was clear that the Ghazi fleet was planning to make a counterclockwise circuit from the east, disguising themselves as Hayriden's fleet sailing south from the Danube estuary. A battle alarm blared aboard the Flying Tulip, and everyone, including Lulu, donned helmets and life jackets. The water wheel began to spin faster, splashing, and the ship began to head northeast. Soon after, the voice of Hayriden greeting Alfred's family was heard on the radio, pirate-style greeting to the whole family. "Why did you rush up?" Alfred said excitedly. "I've calculated that we will catch up with the Ghazi Empire's fleet in the early morning." "Then what?" Hayriden asked angrily. "You only have 3 ships, and you dare to rush up and challenge more than 100 ships on the opposite side." Alfred answered as a matter of course, "Yes." Lulu covered her mouth and laughed. Alfred's actions have always been bold, but carefully calculated. The decision that seems to be a life-threatening one is actually not as dangerous as it seems. Hayriden was silent for a long time before he continued to curse, Peach Blossom Stone Curse. "Don't forget that Wessen's woman is on the boat. If anything happens to her, believe it or not, Wessen will dig up your family's ancestral graves." "It doesn't matter," Alfred said calmly. "No one knows my last name yet. The boss can't find where my family's ancestral graves are. Well, if they are found, the worst that can happen is that I will give him my sister as compensation. My sister's figure is so beautiful that it is 100 miles around." "Ouch! Captain, spare me." Hayriden was completely speechless at this time. Alfred even used the trick of having Lulu head him to interrupt the call. No matter what he said, it was useless. Hayriden told Helmut, who stayed in Majiabao City, about this matter, but he just reported it to the higher authorities and went through the formalities. Are all the people of Wessenland crazy? Heir inside, shaking his head. Wasn't there to charge 1,000-man army alone, to fight 100,000 with only 800 men, and to charge over 100 with just 3 ships, even wanting to fight a night battle? Are his women as crazy as he is? Helmut just smiled and said nothing. Alfred's calculations had been slightly off. The Ghazi Empire's fleet didn't simply make a counterclockwise turn at sea, but instead sailed north, anchoring late at night off the coast of the Crimean Peninsula, north of the Dark Sea. The beach was brightly lit, a camp of several thousand men already established. All the ships were lined up along the coast, and small boats shuttled back and forth between the shore and the ships, allowing people ashore to board. It was clear that their goal wasn't just to destroy the fleet outside Majiabeo, but to siege the city itself. The flat-tops Lexington and Saratoga had recovered the Kirov airships and were loading them with incendiary bombs. At 3 o'clock in the morning, just as the Ghazi Empire fleet was about to load all the mercenaries ashore, 2 monsters with bloody mouths gaping wide were seen flying from the sky. They were about 100 meters above the sea, flying slowly, one in front of the other. Aboard the Kirov-1 airship, the bombardier shouted, "We've entered the bombing runway, maintain altitude." The captain repeated to the pilot, "Maintain altitude." A moment later, the bombardier shouted, 10 seconds. The captain suddenly remembered something and said, "Oh, music." Then she flipped a switch. Those on land and at sea watched in amazement as these 2 unprecedented monsters flew by. Amidst a clamor, a loud musical blast erupted. Amidst the symphonic rendition of Above the Moon, the Kirov-1 airship dropped a bomb on the first ship. The massive black mass slammed heavily into the bow deck, creating a dark hole and, from the sound of it, piercing the second deck. The captain of the Kirov-1 airship cried out in surprise, "Why didn't it explode?" The bombardier quickly replied, "It must be the impact fuse that's malfunctioning again." The captain grumbled, "What's wrong with the maintenance crew? Don't date their squad leader next time." Despite their complaints, they kept working, dropping a 50-kilogram incendiary bomb on every third ship. Because the airship wasn't flying low or fast, its direct hit rate was about half, and those that didn't were mostly within the target's kill radius. However, the fuses in this batch of incendiary bombs were faulty, and they didn't work at all, only making a hole in the ship's deck or causing a splash. Fortunately, the bombs had a timed fuse, similar to the pull ring on a wooden handle grenade, which would detonate about 15 seconds after leaving the bomb bay. Initially, people thought this monster was only capable of throwing rocks, like an eagle carrying a turtle high into the sky and dropping rocks on it to shatter its shell, with a deafening roar. Someone attempted to draw their bow and shoot, but was spotted by the machine gunners on either side of the pod, who quickly summoned the twin P-mounted Gatling guns. The timed fuses activated, and the first ship instantly erupted like a volcano. Searing flames erupted from the breeches, hatches, and portholes, even igniting the sails. Only a few on deck survived by jumping overboard in time. Those in the cabins and the entire ship burned for 3 days and 3 nights. A second incendiary bomb struck the mainmast and exploded, bathing the entire ship in a hail of flames from stem to stern. With no one left on deck, those in the cabin scrambled to jump out of the portholes. Seeing this, the crew of the other ships jumped overboard, but the Kirov airship ignored them, focusing on getting the crews out and preparing for the next step. The soaring Tulip, Lexington, and Saratoga arrived, forming a straight line, and sailed arrogantly within less than 100 meters of the Ghazi Empire fleet. The 2 Kirov airships carried only 32 incendiary bombs, leaving many more ships unattacked. Alfred assigned each ship a task. The Tulip, at the head of the fleet, was tasked with opening the enemy's hull, while the 2 ships behind it fired any incendiary weapons into the opening. The beach seemed to be adorned with a fiery necklace, the bright beads representing the blazing ships. Someone on shore tried to put out the fire, but Alfred had already ordered the fleet to turn around. "You put it out on the shore, while I let the fire burn even more fiercely out to sea." The monsters from the sea and air departed, and the survivors of the Ghazi Empire and their hired mercenaries sat on the beach, illuminated by the flames. Many remained in a state of confusion, still unable to comprehend what had happened. The 2 flat tops, after landing and checking to see if they were safe, immediately reloaded their ammunition, this time with 5 kilograms anti-personnel rounds, specifically designed to eliminate dense, unprotected crowds. The beach was sparsely populated. This time, the airships ascended to an altitude of 1,000 meters, and it was a matter of chance who would be struck by the bombs. The enemies on the ground collapsed amidst the explosions. Anyone who could escape fled, never looking back, away from the sea. Alfred, upon receiving the airship's report, ordered a return. The Ghazi Empire's people, without a ship, could swim to Magiabeo City. Many years later, a new custom emerged in the surrounding areas. Around the summer solstice, seafarers would craft a fat, flying shark out of cloth and paper and hang it atop the mast. This served as a warning to the flying shark in the sky: we already have your little one here, there's no need to lay eggs on this ship. Chapter 258. Before the war. When news of the annihilation of the enemy at sea reached many were skeptical, especially the local landowners whom Prince Dragaces was trying to win over. They all believed that Duke Wessen's army was spreading rumors. Hayreddin was also initially skeptical, until he personally went out to sea and saw the charred wreckage strewn across the beach. Then Frederick faced a major dilemma. "What do you mean?" he asked Prince Dragaces. "What are these people doing here?" Dragaces replied apologetically, "They're here to help." Frederick looked at the knights chatting away and the soldiers with dull eyes, and shook his head, saying, "They can only help me with my rations." These people were small landowners who had lived in the area for hundreds of years, leading an idyllic life and relying on payments to support their campaigns. After confirming that the Wesson army had destroyed over 100 ships of the Ghazi Empire, they felt confident that Prince Dragaces could accomplish his goal. Suddenly, their martial spirit surged. They dug out their ancestral weapons from the bottom of their chests, and, along with the farmers armed with pitchforks, came to help. Dragaces said with a hint of self-mockery, "I told them to bring their own rations and horse feed." Frederick turned to look at little Franz and said with a smile, "You're the commander. You decide what to do with these people." Little Franz took the offer from his leader with a frown. It looked like only a small number of these men were good at wielding spears and clubs. A few could throw a fireball that could ignite a straw pile or an ice spike or clod of earth that could kill a dog. They were fine against bandits and thieves, but facing regular troops would be like committing suicide. After a long deliberation, he said, "Why not have them guard the left side of the main position, pretending to be the main cavalry force? This will keep the enemy from figuring out our true strength." It's just that, there were some questions that little Franz couldn't quite articulate, so Frederick asked them for him. What if they don't obey orders? Dragaces was silent. He knew very well that the Wesson army had strict discipline, and disobeying orders and acting without authorization would result in punishment. "I'll command them myself," Dragaces said. "Along with my light cavalry, they'll just be the last ones to pursue the fleeing enemy." Dragaces had coaxed over 200 armed nomads from the Danube estuary. These were excellent light cavalry, drawn from among them for the Osmagian Empire's hussars. Frederick and Franz the Younger nodded, and the men were left as spectators. However, keeping them in line proved difficult. They had brought along merchants who feasted, drank, and gambled outside the camp, creating a chaotic atmosphere. Frederick had no time to manage them. The enemy army had already marched, and Phocas, leading the charge himself with a claimed force of 100,000 men, had begun to appear in the sky, hawks controlled by animal trainers, conducting aerial reconnaissance. For the next few days, Frederick and Marie took turns flying overhead to shoo away any large birds, until dark clouds gathered and a steady drizzle began to fall. However, Phocas's men had already learned the location of the Wesson army's defensive positions, and a skirmish had begun. At Dragaces' request, Franz the Younger dispatched his light cavalry to conduct long-range surveillance, scouting for enemy activity and intercepting spies. These young men, eager to impress their new boss, performed their duties effectively, and even borrowed the heads of several fellow villagers. Frederick and Franz the Younger had no objections, leaving Dragaces to his own devices. This was his territory. The rain intensified, and Frederick and Richardel moved their fishing spots several times. The rain, colder than the lake itself, had cooled the water, and the fish were not biting. "Master," Frederick suddenly asked in a low voice, "are you confident you can take on the two magic gods facing us?" Richardel answered truthfully, "No. Among the magic gods under Phocas's command, there's Haakon from the Ghazi Empire. He failed in his political struggle and fled to Constantinople to make a living. Haakon appears to be only good at wind magic, but I heard that he has also learned an ancient transformation magic found on an island in the inland sea, which can make a person as strong and powerful as a bull. Such an opponent is not easy to deal with. If I get distracted, I will be defeated." There is also a man named Galani who is proficient in fire magic. The fire carpet that can float on the water was invented by him. It seems that he fled to Constantinople many years ago and made a breakthrough in the past 2 years with the support of Phocas. I guess, at that time, Hakan will hold me back, and Galani will deal with you. If I am distracted to deal with you, we will all be finished. Frederick frowned and nodded slightly. If that was the case, it would be difficult to deal with. He asked again, Master, what was your head-to-head confrontation like? Although the book recorded numerous duels at their level, Frederick found them somewhat unreliable. After all, it was written by an outsider, heavily embellished with artistic embellishments and missing details, differences that could prove fatal in actual combat. Richardner pondered for a moment and said, whoever errs first will die. No testing of the waters. Fight as soon as they meet. No idle chatter, no slack for a moment. It may take a long time, from full moon to full moon, for cities and mountains to be reduced to dust. Or perhaps in a moment, in the blink of an eye, a legend has fallen, yet the battle has already begun. The opponent's strength, personality, and record must be analyzed, truth verified, and countermeasures devised. Rumors about oneself must also be collected, to address any flaws and lay traps. Frederick felt he understood. This was a battle with a very low margin of error. Both sides must focus their full attention, not revealing a single flaw, not missing a single opening. He touched a ring on his finger. He was not without strength, but he only had one chance. The rain stopped after a while, but the clouds were still there, just a little thinner, and it was estimated that it would continue to rain. The wind got stronger, and the air became fresher, which made people's brains work faster. Frederick suddenly asked, Master, can we take the initiative to kill them, or find a way to separate them? Richardner turned his head and looked at him, and asked calmly, do you think I am a fool? Frederick immediately replied, I don't look like it. Ouch. After knocking his head, Richardner said, it is impossible to cheat, but everyone has their own weaknesses. And you can use these weaknesses to plan. Frederick nodded. Just like when King William wanted to transfer Richardner, he could achieve his goal by attacking from the side. He just had a very rough idea, and everyone needed to discuss it together to see if it would work. If it was theoretically feasible, they would discuss the next details. The fever finally subsided. Chapter 259, Planning and Provoking. Rainy weather was severely hampering the army's march. Phocas's expeditionary force could only cover about 10 kilometers per day, half its normal pace. However, outpost battles of 5 to 10 men continued unabated. The expeditionary light cavalry, leveraging their familiarity with the terrain, continuously attacked the Wesson army's battlefield perimeter, attempting to gain more territory. Frederick, heading to headquarters to discuss a possible plot against the enemy, the god of law, was met by Marie, dressed in light armor, emerging from the headquarters, looking delighted. Marie embraced and kissed Frederick, then left without a backward glance. Nearby, a small group of about 20 men, Marie's guards and attendants, along with 2 Wesson signalmen carrying a radio, were seen. Marie mounted her warhorse and led the troops away. Frederick entered the tent and saw young Franz and Dragaces studying a sand table. Franz was essentially dictating the next move, while Dragaces studied intently. Frederick observed from the side that the punitive force had actually established a secret camp in the mountains 20 kilometers away as a base for an advance operation. It was easily defended and difficult to attack, with over 200 men there. Dragaces' light cavalry suffered greatly. Young Franz said to him, Her Highness, go and destroy this camp. She's experienced in mountain warfare. If we can get her to join us, don't even think about it. Frederick shook his head. She's royal, not an ordinary noble. You worry about her, but her family doesn't. What if one day I find a son and claim he's hers, and I take him to Wayne and make him emperor? But I'm planning to raise a mountain army. We'll talk about that later. For now, let's talk about something else. He looked at Dragaces and asked, I have an idea. Phocas currently has 2 magic gods, Hakan and Galani, under his command. Is there any way to separate them so we can defeat them separately? Dragaces, relying on his renowned Richardner, was not afraid of the 2 magic gods. Like many, he believed he could easily take on 2, but he also thought it would be a good idea to defeat them separately. I have someone around Phocas, Dragaces whispered, but this matter needs to be studied carefully and we can't act rashly. Frederick nodded and said, I have some ideas, such as unintentionally provoking them, letting them compete for credit, and one of them will be reckless. Or so Discord, let them tear each other apart and refuse to cooperate. Dragaces frowned and paced in the tent. After a moment, he said, Galani was trained by Phocas and is very loyal to him. Hakin has always been very arrogant and often looks down on Phocas. The two of them have accumulated many conflicts because of this, but I don't know if it's intentional. If you want them to act separately, you can only find a way to provoke one of them. At this time, little Franz said, it's okay to provoke them all. Phocas doesn't dare to let both of them come, so we can just do it. Frederick and Dragaces thought it made sense. Phocas had witnessed with his own eyes how Richardnal was fast and accurate within 7 steps. He certainly wouldn't dare to let the two gods of magic leave his side. Dragaces stood before the sand table, pondering for a moment before whispering to the two men, Phocas has a very unpleasant past. Many people implicated in it have been murdered. He's very sensitive. Whenever anyone mentions a related topic, he interprets it as a subtle taunt. He kills those he can on the spot, and if not, he uses other methods to eliminate them. It just so happens that I know what this incident is about. We can exploit this, Frederick, curious about the false emperor's dark past, eagerly demanded. Tell me what it is. Dragaces' explanation shocked little Franz, as did the surrounding staff. Frederick frowned. When Phocas was 13, his family was targeted and captured. If his enemies drugged him with a bloodthirsty mushroom decoction and forced him to kill every male member of his family with their own hands, then drugging him and all his female relatives with a seductive mushroom decoction, throwing them into a cage and letting the crowd watch for fun, that was a truly moral violation. Frederick had heard of the bloodthirsty mushroom decoction. Drinking it made him yearn for blood, even colder than a drug addict. He'd also tried the charm mushroom decoction in Wayne. After drinking it, his entire being subconsciously engaged in a harmonious movement of life, like breathing, with no other thoughts. Even after the effects wore off, he could still remember everything clearly. More importantly, the drug's effects were completely insensitive to the target. Had a young lady's maid not thrown a pet drug out the window when it ran into her room, his reputation would have been ruined. This incident certainly infuriated Phocas, but it also challenged moral standards. Forget it, Frederick finally shook his head. His enemies forced him to do something so inhumane and unjust that it's condemned by both God and man. If we exploit this for profit, we'd be as shameless as those people. He then solemnly addressed the others in the headquarters tent. Let's pretend we haven't heard anything about this. This method won't work. Even butchers have boundaries. If we can't uphold our idealistic, moral, cultured, and disciplined Wessenland standards, our vaunted military might will only turn us into two-legged vampires and ghouls. Dragaces looked at Frederick in surprise, unsure of his thoughts. Throughout history, extremes have been used on the battlefield, as going beyond moral boundaries is rarely heard of. However, Dragaces quickly relented. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that the angel of the god of light possessed him. Frederick had his own ideas. The battlefield was a place where people's minds could be easily distorted. He didn't want a bunch of psychopaths among his men to run into society, so he kept talking about the bottom line, not allowing soldiers to kill and abuse prisoners. After he finished speaking, Metzger said, yes, when I killed pigs before, I would kill them with one knife, and I wouldn't stab them for fun. Only then did the others in the tent remember that this guy used to be a pig killer. Frederick asked Dragaces about some of their taboos and illusions, and soon came up with a new idea. After listening, Dragaces thought for a long time, and finally said, this method can indeed irritate him, and it is very simple. Simple means there will be no mistakes. It will be more effective if you can attach a handwritten letter from you. Frederick thought about it and agreed, and began to make arrangements. A little sleepy, I wonder if it's a side effect of the medicine. Chapter 260 Gift Giving. The army set out, rising before dawn to prepare breakfast, packing up immediately afterward and setting off at daybreak. They set up camp by noon, otherwise they wouldn't have a secure tent in place before nightfall. From dusk on, Phocas and his men enjoyed belly dancing while feasting on wine and meat. Ever since Phocas attempted to usurp the throne, his hobby had become a sought-after emulation, and belly dancing, a tradition originating from the south, had become a new imperial music for the past 2 years. A whole roasted lamb was brought before Phocas, and Galani, standing beside it, bowed to him. Phocas smiled smugly, but he grumbled, Galani, you could have just let one of the servants do this. Why do you have to do it yourself? Galani, in his early 40s, looked quite youthful, with chestnut-colored hair and eyes, a high nose bridge, and deep, deep eyes that captivated women. He calmly told Phocas, "Your Majesty, their cooking is inadequate, they haven't controlled the heat properly." Phocas smiled, then asked him to sit aside. He personally cut the meat from the roasted whole lamb, where the neck meets the torso, and had a slave girl bring it to Galani, his favorite part. When the slave girl placed the roasted lamb before Galani, he stood and meticulously thanked Phocas. Then Phocas carved 2 more portions from the back of the lamb, one for Hakan and the other for Arda, an officer of the Ghazi Imperial Guard who had come to support him. The other nobles could only gaze enviously at the 3 men, their roasted lamb cut by servants. Phocas leaned back in his sturdy chair and snorted. Immediately, a slave girl placed a napkin on his chest, and other slave girls fed him delicacies and fine wine. Many others were dining in this way, but Galani was the only one who made the exception. He was allowed to do the same, but he only allowed the slave girl Phocas had rewarded him with wine to pour into his glass. The belly dancers, clad in 50% sheer tulle dresses and minimalist tank tops, danced with increasing intensity, their ankle bells jingling melodiously, the atmosphere growing increasingly lively. Amidst the clatter of bells and the aroma of wine and meat, soldiers were pouring bean powder, chopped bacon, and whatever theoretically edible items they could find into a pot. Just as everyone was enjoying themselves, someone arrived to announce that Duke Wesson had sent a gift to the emperor. "Oh," Phocas was startled. "That Wesson brat would send me a gift?" Someone immediately stood up, raising their glass to flatter him. "This must be His Majesty personally leading 100,000 troops. Wesson feels like a slime facing a dragon. He's starting to curry favor with His Majesty and ask for surrender." Others, a bit slower, followed suit and began to offer their flattery. Someone said obscenely, "Your Majesty, you can't let him get away with it. I heard his fiancée is the most beautiful woman in the upper Danube. Why don't you let him offer her up instead? I also heard he has many beautiful women, including his teacher, Psyche." Before he could finish his words, a wine glass and a plate slammed down on his head. Galani and Hakan attacked simultaneously, and there was no way he could save his head. Hakan breathed a sigh of relief. If he hadn't double-checked that Psyche had stayed in Wesson and not come with him, he would have fled long ago. Phocas gestured, and everyone understood. He was just a minor nobleman. Dead. Dead. The body would be taken away and thrown away. The army, property, and territory would all be taken over by the emperor. Someone would take care of all this. Galani glared at the body being dragged away, silent for a long time. The other nobles pretended not to see anything. Even if they had seen it, what would it matter? Would they challenge the 2 gods of law? The scene returned to its lively atmosphere, with the flattery and belly dancing continuing as if nothing had happened. All right, Phocas smiled, standing up. "Let me see what goodies Wesson has brought." The gift was quickly brought up. It was a large chest, about a man's height, large enough for several men standing. The men who had brought the gift lowered their heads, not daring to look up at Phocas. "You?" Phocas asked in surprise. "Aren't you at the forward camp?" They all knelt down, and the leader trembled. "Your Majesty, the camp has been lost." Phocas's face darkened, but he didn't order any punishment. He simply said in a cold voice, "Explain what happened." The camp's defenses were formidable, but if Richardnal had personally acted, they would have been no different from straw. Phocas, having led the army for many years, knew not to be overly critical of failures caused by disparities in strength. He needed to inquire thoroughly before making any decisions. The leading officer lowered his head and said, "The day before yesterday, a woman arrived. She had gray hair and wielded a flaming saber. She rode straight up, chopped down the camp gate, and stormed in with a dozen men. After they entered, most of us fought our way to the wall, but that woman and a few others slaughtered us from start to finish. When she finally reached us, she was covered in the blood of our brothers." Immediately after he finished speaking, someone said, "Your Majesty, this woman must be Princess Mary of the Osmaga Empire." Phocas simply nodded and said nothing, ordering the box to be opened. There was a button on the box's wooden planks. Pressing it caused the planks to fall outward like blooming flowers. A dark shadow suddenly shot out from the box, swirling in the air before flying towards Phocas. Galani stood up abruptly, raised his hand, and a flaming arm stretched out 2 meters, grabbing the shadow. "Elemental puppet," Galani frowned. It was a rough-looking black bird, with a letter inside its body. Phocas took the letter from Gallian's hands and began to read it. His face, already dark at the side of the gift, now trembled with anger, his cheeks trembling with anger. "Wesson," Phocas roared, slamming the letter down on the table before him. "I will kill you." Galien, equally scowling, cautiously picked up the letter. Frederick had written on it, "Phocas, you, expletive. You dared to blackmail me back then. Now I'm here. If you want to live, put on this dress and belly dance before me for 3 days and 3 nights. The others present," gasped as the box was opened. Frederick had sent a belly dancer's dress, worn by a wooden figure whose figure was identical to the emperor's. Furthermore, the dress was made of coarse linen, the kind worn only by dancers in the sort of inns frequented by sailors and coachmen. Galien was also furious, his eyes blazing with anger. He turned to Phocas and said, "Your Majesty, I will go and capture Wesson and bring him to you for your punishment." After that, he left without caring whether Phocas agreed or not. Chapter 261, Wesson kills the magic god with a cup of wine. The battlefield was ever-changing, and the political struggles beyond it were no less unpredictable. News of the complete annihilation of the Ghazi Empire's naval intervention spread quickly through the merchants, quickly reaching Constantine. Coupled with the fact that Phocas led his troops in person, many of the city's families became increasingly agitated. Some quietly left Constantine, sailing north to Magiabeo, ultimately reaching the southern army's positions. Dragaces hosted a banquet for these guests, where a series of political agreements were reached over the course of the feast. Frederick was in attendance, along with several officers. One visitor, named Chak, sought to curry favor with Dragaces and Frederick, bringing dozens of belly dancers to the banquet. He reasoned that if the two leaders and their subordinates were attracted to the dancers and then asked him for their services, they could establish a close relationship. However, Dragaces maintained a strong expression, remaining expressionless, and his subordinates naturally dared not act. As for the Wesson army, everyone looked on in disgust. Chuck asked Frederick with some curiosity, "Your Excellency the Duke, do you think the dancing of my dancers is unsightly?" Frederick answered bluntly, "Yes, they have weak hip swings, poor abdominal shaking, loose steps, and dull expressions. If they were in our Wesson state, they would be driven off the stage by the audience." Chuck's face looked a little ugly. He felt that Frederick looked down on him and took the opportunity to slap him in the face. Seeing this, Dragaces immediately said to him, "The belly dance in the Sun River dance troupe in Wesson state originated from the court of the Kingdom of Kush. After absorbing the essence of dances from other places in Wesson state, the belly dance of the dance troupe reached a new height. Even people from the Kingdom of Kush began to learn it." Chuck felt a little better after hearing him say that, and said to Frederick with a little envy, "Your Excellency the Duke is so lucky. In many places, singers and dancers are tools kept in the homes of aristocrats and wealthy people, used for appreciation, playing or gifts." He obviously thought that Frederick could sing every night. Frederick understood his meaning and snapped, "Don't talk nonsense. In our place, being a dancer is a serious job. Good dancers can earn 4 or 5 gold coins a month, and some even join community and regional councils." Dragaces tried to smooth things over, saying, "Wesson state is different from many places. If you're interested, you can go and see it. And don't worry about the church. There's a small Eastern church outside of Weissenberg, which is accredited by the local church." Seeing this, Chuck stopped dwelling on the issue and immediately raised his glass. "Cheers to Duke Wesson." Everyone else in the tent joined in the toast. Just then, a searing pressure swept through the camp. An angry voice echoed through everyone's ears, "Friedrich von Wesson, come out and kneel and surrender." Frederick's face darkened. He stood up and said, "This drink will wait. I'll be back soon." As he spoke, he felt the pressure growing even stronger. A key hallmark of a transcendental saint is the ability to project a domain. Any movement within the domain is detected, and attacks can be launched from anywhere. In addition to the overwhelming pressure, the temperature within Galeni's domain suddenly rose dramatically, estimated to exceed 50 degrees Celsius. The Wesson army, trained in this area, immediately fled as soon as the god of magic's domain appeared. Galeni believed the men had been frightened off. Today's primary target was Frederick, and Richardner was also nearby, so a quick victory was crucial, without any unnecessary complications. Little did he know that every member of the Wesson army knew the Sword Saint's domain had a limited range. Those who ventured outside would be targeted. Frederick sprinted out of the tent at top speed, but under the pressure of the god of magic's power, he slowed down by 20%. Galeni soared over 30 meters in the air, surrounded by dozens of flaming flying fish, deflecting numerous long-range bullets. Frederick stood still in the open space in front of the barracks, aware that he was staring intently at the ring on his left middle finger. Galani growled angrily, "She actually gave you this ring." Frederick had received the ring from Psyche when they first met. The gray magic crystal contained the element of annihilation, a substance not found naturally in this world. This was one of the reasons he dared to confront the god of magic head-on. Galani made no move as 4 3-meter-tall fire giants appeared around Frederick. They were practically transformed into magic crystals, their weapons wielded, charging at him, blocking his escape route. These fire giants were incredibly fast, and even without their suppression domain, Frederick couldn't match their speed. Frederick didn't dodge. He used a cheat Psyche had given him, a skill she had only just begun publicly using. Behind each fire giant, a strange purple plant suddenly emerged. A thigh-thick vine, topped by a large, round ball with a mouth, swallowed the fire giant in one gulp. Simultaneously, dozens of ice archers, each as tall as a man, appeared from the ground nearby, spitting blue icy balls at Galani in the sky. But it seemed to be of little use. Dozens of ice balls flew less than 10 meters before being consumed by flames that appeared out of nowhere. Even the ice archers on the ground were consumed. Simultaneously, a dozen fireballs, each 50 to 60 meters in diameter, instantly formed in the air, poised to crash into the barracks. At that moment, Galani paused, as if his internet connection was slow. He suddenly found himself suspended in a room, surrounded by pounding music, and standing before him, 4 muscular men in scant clothing. Frederick, with all his might, unleashed his illusionary soul magic, 4-head phantom fist, but it only managed to temporarily disorient the mage god and seemed to have the opposite effect. Upon regaining consciousness, Galani went berserk. "How dare you," Galani shouted angrily, "use your magic for such a vile thing? You are insulting her. You are unworthy. You are unworthy." The fireballs from the sky quickly crashed to the ground, and the entire barracks was suddenly engulfed in flames. After his roar, he suddenly realized he couldn't sense what Frederick was doing. Behind Frederick stood an angel with outstretched wings. The radiance it emanated forced Galani's domain back. Frederick stood in the center of the light, his right hand holding a forearm-long, thumb-thick steel spike between his fingers, pointing it at Galani. His left hand grasped his right wrist, and a swarm of electric currents, as thick as fingers, slithered around his body like snakes. Rapidly growing in size, Galani could tell with just his eyes that Frederick's aura was surging, growing, and growing in strength. The currents around him grew increasingly violent, prompting the thought, what the hell can stop him? Countless fire elements converged in front of Galani at speeds exceeding that of sound, forming in a matter of seconds into a flaming crystal spear the size of a man. Lurking just outside the edge of his domain, Richardel couldn't help but sweat. If this strike landed, he'd be able to fish in the new lake next year. Frederick moved first. Countless electric currents surged to the front of his right hand, forming an electromagnetic cannon barrel composed of lightning rings 2 meters in diameter and approximately 10 meters long. The gray, star-studded annihilation element on his left ring enveloped the outer layer of the steel spike in his right hand. At the end of the spike, a hollow cavity held 9 layers of light elemental rings, each rotating in a different direction. The steel spike flew towards Galani at several times the speed of sound, colliding head-on with the flame crystal spear. The dense fire element vanished upon contact with the annihilation element surrounding the steel spike, and the steel spike passed through Galani with ease, like tofu. Galani, seized by the thought that his life was in danger, formed a flame crystal shield before him. 2 loud bangs echoed in the air. The steel spike had consumed nearly all of its annihilation element as it passed through the spear, but the immense kinetic energy was still enough to pierce Galani's shield with a deafening crash. The second loud bang came from the circle of light elements within the tail of the steel spike. They merged together in an instant, and the high-speed collision of light elements released a huge amount of energy. The dazzling sun seemed to have fallen to the ground. The huge shock wave even blew out several burning tents not far away, and a small mushroom rose. Galani's domain disappeared. Frederick turned around and returned to the tent as if nothing had happened. He picked up his wine glass and toasted everyone who was still in fear, then drank the warm wine that had just been heated by the domain. Many years later, Tao Huishi published the story of Emperor Wei in the extreme west. When writing about this passage, there was a poem praising it. The 2 emperors talked happily and poured wine, while the camp at the gate was on fire. Emperor Wei stopped drinking and showed his bravery, killing the god of magic with a glass of wine. Chapter 262, Covert March. Is Frederick here? Richardel knocked on the wooden door of Frederick's cabin. Frederick was taking his medicine, and Mary replied, "He's here." "I'll open the door." Richardel smirked. "No hurry. I'll wait until you're dressed." Mary blushed slightly and immediately opened the door. Richardel saw Frederick still sitting in bed, so he sat on a chair beside the bed and asked, "How are you? Can you walk now?" Frederick had killed a magic god that day. Even with the help of Psyche's angels to block Galeni's field, the final blow, some magical electromagnetic cannon, had exhausted all his strength. If he hadn't been forcing himself back to his tent to show off and avoid rumors of his own demise, he would have collapsed. The rumor among the army was that the commander, excited at having killed a magic god, had dragged Princess Mary back to the cabin to celebrate. You know how to celebrate. In reality, Frederick had Mary support him back to the cabin, where he remained unconscious for 2 nights. Now, 3 days after waking, he was still very weak. Just now, little Franz came to report the damage caused by Galien, blaming Marie for Frederick's weakness. Frederick replied, "I still have no strength. I can only take a few steps." Richardel observed his complexion and said, "You've been overexerted. You need to rest." Håkon, the enemy, sent me a message. He believes mother-in-law Psyche has arrived, so he told me to stage a scene where he admits defeat and flees. For the past few days, Phocas' army has remained stationary. The camp gates are closed, and Håkon has been seen inside. Frederick frowned, thinking for a moment. Then he asked seriously, "Master, do you think this is a problem?" Richardel thought for a moment and replied, "I'm not familiar with military operations, but I think they may have judged that Galien and I are both suffering, and this presents an opportunity for them to exploit." Frederick nodded slightly. Richardel said, "Rest well. Since you've delegated authority, you must trust them." After Richardel left, Marie returned with a pot of potato stew, followed by little Franz. As Marie fed Frederick, little Franz said, "Commander, Your Highness, I suspect the enemy's seclusion is a pretense. They're actually trying to paralyze us. I suspect Phocas will feign inactivity, but in reality, he's already using his familiarity with the terrain to dispatch some elite troops to bypass the main roads and attack us lightly. Your Highness, please conduct a reconnaissance at night. I'm worried that the enemy, thanks to our aerial reconnaissance, will rest under cover in the woods during the day and march at night." Marie spoon-fed Frederick meat, and Frederick nodded. Marie immediately agreed, "No problem, I'll go after dark." Little Franz thanked Marie and departed. Marie said to Frederick, "Your men are quite capable. They haven't let their victory get to their heads." Frederick simply sighed. The dozen or so fireballs Galien unleashed on the camp had caused immense damage, leaving those caught in the flames with little hope of recovery. Over 300 men were killed, over 100 seriously injured or disabled, and dozens more likely wounded. He now felt a surge of regret. If he had anticipated Galeni's imminent arrival and evacuated in advance, the losses would have been mitigated. Mary understood his thoughts but remained silent. This was a necessity for every military commander, and he had to navigate it on his own. Meanwhile, in a valley south of the southern front, Phocas had just emerged from his oversized sleeping bag. The valley was densely wooded, with shade plants growing beneath the trees. Like Phocas, many others had woken up. Their first act was to don crowns of green branches to avoid detection by winged unicorns or fire dragons. Phocas's expression remained gloomy, and the officer reporting in was extremely cautious. Their 20,000-man army had divided into several routes, advancing secretly by long detours. Each group had reached their designated locations the previous night, and with only half a night's climb up the mountain, they would emerge on the main road about 20 kilometers south of Wessenland. After hearing the report, Phocas said, "Order all troops, do not move tonight." After such a long journey through the mountains, rest for 2 days, he then added in a cold voice, "Tell them, from tonight until the night after tomorrow, no fires are allowed while crossing the mountains. Anyone who creates even a blaze will be killed." The order quickly spread, not only to the other troops in the surrounding mountains, but also to the barracks within, where the gates were firmly locked. The operation was postponed for 2 days. While a surprise attack was supposed to take the enemy by surprise, the troops were already exhausted after days of marching through the mountains. Without rest, they would be ineffective. Soon after, Arda of the Ghazi Imperial Guard arrived and reported to Phocas, "Your Majesty, can we move our artillery forward in advance? This would save a lot of time." Phocas pondered for a long time, then shook his head and declined. He told Arda, "We must be cautious now. Enemy scouts could appear at any moment. We can't take that risk. Is your powder damp?" "This battle depends on you," Arda quickly replied. "Everything has been checked. Even if it starts to rain heavily, it's fine." Less than 10 seconds after he finished speaking, raindrops began to fall, and a few minutes later, a torrential downpour arrived. Phocas huddled under the tarp, a faint smile on his face. Rain was good. While it would hinder his own movements, it would also affect enemy reconnaissance. It would be best to wait until he was right under the enemy's nose before the rain stopped. Huddled under a tarp, Arda listened to Phocas's words. Since taking power, Wesson has never suffered a major loss. This is his fatal flaw. Galani is dead. I believe you must have severely injured Dragaces and caused heavy casualties to the army. A rookie who has never experienced a major defeat would be panicked, blame himself, and lose confidence when faced with such a loss. That's why I had Hakan write a letter to Richardnell and stay in the camp to lull them into complacency. We also pretended to stay indoors to make Wesson think we were panicking. Arda listened quietly. At first, he thought Phocas's words made sense. Now, hearing them every day, he didn't know if Duke Wesson was panicking, but he felt he was. This operation was a desperate gamble. At night, the rain eased. Arda looked up at the sky and suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. A dark shadow passed over 300 meters in the air. The only airborne force at that moment was Wesson's army. Fortunately, everyone was asleep, and there were no lights, so they went undetected. In the middle of the night, Mary returned to the cabin. She took off her wet clothes and hung them on the wall. She heated a basin of water and wiped herself. She told Frederick, "I just reported to headquarters. The areas south where we can march are completely dark, with no fire at all." Frederick breathed a sigh of relief. After she finished wiping herself, he pulled her into bed and said softly, "Thank you for your wasted trip on a rainy day." Mary kissed him on the cheek and smiled, saying, "It's okay. This kind of thing happens all the time. No news is still news." Chapter 263 Probing Attack. After 2 days of heavy rain, Phocas's army crossed the mountains and reached the main road. The sky was cloudless, and the rising sun was a bit dazzling. The 20,000-man army had set out, but over 100 men had been lost along the way. One cannon and 20% of their supplies had fallen into the valley and could not be recovered. Phocas, pleased with this, gave everyone a short rest, rations, and formations to reorganize before setting out towards the Wesson lines. Meanwhile, the barracks in the rear were no longer closed, and 30,000 troops set out on horseback or in carriages, followed by soldiers carrying supplies and conscripted farmers. As they approached the Wesson lines, Phocas once again addressed Arda, "You are the protagonists of this battle today. You will command. Breaking through the lines would be great. If not, weaken them and wait for the main force to arrive from the rear before making a final push." Arda glanced at the rising sun and confidently declared, "Rest assured, Your Majesty, I will surely see you drink the wine of victory today." Phocas chuckled, patting his horse and saying, "Alice, old friend, I'm getting old and can't run fast anymore. Otherwise, I would definitely charge with you." He seemed oblivious to the fact that his horse's slowness was due to the weight he had put on over the years. The Wessons quickly received the news, and headquarters immediately ordered all units into combat. At headquarters, Franz the Younger issued the latest order: those arriving so far are only the enemy's vanguard. The main force hasn't arrived yet. Don't attack too hard or scare them off. Frederick reached the small hillock by the lake and, in headquarters, he and Eugene observed the enemy's formation through binoculars. "Impressive," Frederick exclaimed. 3,000 musketeers, 19 artillery pieces, 5 of which are of considerable caliber. Well used, they could decide the outcome of a major battle. Eugene nervously said to him, "Commander, it looks like they were going to attack us first. You should return to the main position." Frederick shook his head and continued to observe the enemy's weapons. The enemy had now all entered the range of the Wesson artillery, but Franz the Younger did not order a shot, instead waiting for the enemy to strike first. Alda, looking at the Wesson position, cursed, for no other reason than that they had dug many trenches in the ground, with only one protruding head visible. He ordered 5 120mm caliber guns to divert the attack on the Wesson main position, while the remaining 14 90mm caliber guns bombarded the hillock by the lake, testing their hand on this small position, which was supposed to protect the water supply line. Seeing the enemy artillery pointed in their direction, Eugene immediately ordered, "Everyone, move to the reverse slope." He had only been with the Wesson army for a short time, but during that time, he had been constantly learning, from weapon performance and regulations to various combat examples from actual combat and exercises. He felt that he had barely kept up with this amazing army. But the true situation would only be revealed after a battle. Frederick saw little powder leaking out of the enemy's gunpowder as it was reloaded and was blown away by the wind. He curled his lips and said, "It's gunpowder. No wonder it's so close. If it can reach 1,500 meters, it's a success." A cloud of white smoke soon rose from the opposing artillery position. A dozen black shells flew towards the hillocks near the lake, kicking up sheets of mud. The ground was soft from the heavy rain, and the shells made craters instead of ricochets. Eugene sighed. "That's quite powerful." Frederick nodded and said, "The way the army fights needs to change from now on." The enemy realized that the shells were not effective when hitting the muddy ground, so they began firing at the barbed wire surrounding the position. However, solid bullets had limited destructive power against the barbed wire, and after several rounds, there was little effect. Eugene then issued a new order: "Snipers, take out a few of the artillerymen, to make them nervous." Soon, a burst of gunfire erupted from the position, and several artillerymen fell, many wounded, a few killed. Alda immediately ordered the heavy infantry to place their shields in front of the artillery, attempting to protect the valuable artillerymen. Eugene stopped firing the snipers and told everyone to retreat to the back to rest. Little Franz's order was to hold the enemy back, so they would slowly wear them down. "Wow!" Frederick burst out laughing. It actually exploded. Eugene's tactic of increasing pressure on the enemy was successful. One of the guns had poured gunpowder into the barrel without cleaning it, and the residual fire ignited it, causing the half-filled gunpowder bag at the muzzle to explode in the gunner's hand. Seeing that the enemy seemed to be short-handed, Alda ordered the infantry to move out. 100 musketeers marched forward, followed by 300 pikemen and sword and shield soldiers. Franz Jr. called to ask if artillery support was needed. Eugene replied, "Not yet. Let's save the artillery for last." Franz Jr. relayed another order: "Princess Marie has the latest enemy information. Enemy reinforcements are on a forced march and are expected to arrive tonight. Increase firepower appropriately." The enemy artillery was pounding the barbed wire at full force, and as the infantry approached, it began to bombard the hillside positions. Eugene issued a new order: "All troops, take cover, and snipers, tell the artillery to halt." The snipers quickly resumed their fire, this time with significant success. One enchanted bullet struck a bag of gunpowder powder, which in turn detonated the surrounding gunpowder. However, the gunpowder, contained in waterproof bags, was less explosive than in sealed containers, causing minimal damage. But that was enough. Alda immediately ordered all artillery to be moved, while simultaneously dispatching 300 musketeers and 1,000 cold weapon troops to attack the hills along the lake's edge. As the first wave of enemies approached the barbed wire below the hill, at Eugene's command, the soldiers squatting in the trenches rose and began firing. Soldiers armed with P-guns emptied their 20-round magazines into the dense enemy area, then crouched down to reload. The enemy musketeers opened fire hastily, but their guns produced so much smoke that the smoke obscured the view of those behind them. This wasn't a problem for the Wessons. If they couldn't see, they could just use cherry bullets. At the lakeside positions, the P-gun Gatling rifles, originally used as flanking fire points, turned their muzzles and pointed them at the enemies rushing along the lake's edge. With a twist of the handle, bullets blazed into the enemy, instantly disintegrating the previously orderly ranks. Some, terrified, leaped into the lake, soon dyeing the water red. Arda's face darkened as he hurriedly ordered a retreat. However, none of the 400 men sent out in the first wave ever returned, and only a fraction of the 1,300 men from the second wave, who had been sent to the lake, returned. Phocas, his face darkening, approached Arda and said, "The enemy's spears are more powerful than yours. Let the mages join the fight." Arda nodded and began adjusting his forces. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264. The enemy is also improving. In the main position's command post, young Franz carefully observed the enemy's shifting formations through a telescope. A trainee staff officer was observing the enemy while muttering to himself, "For a long time, the battlefield has three axes: firepower, protection, and mobility. All weapons and tactics revolve around these three." Young Franz ignored him. Many people were busy with their duties, and he himself was munching on a piece of jelly bean. Across the way, Phocas and Alda coordinated the deployment of their troops. The main force launched an attack on the main position from the side facing the mountain, while a portion of the force launched a diversionary attack on the hillock near the lake. The diversionary force halted over 200 meters from the hillock and fired long-range shots at it, sending bullets raining down on the enemy positions. Eugene felt bored. He couldn't show his strength without an enemy attack, so he ordered the soldiers in the position to rest in the cat holes dug beside the trenches. Young Franz checked the time. There were still 4 hours until sunset, plenty of time to slowly wear down the enemy. Alda ordered all artillery fire to bombard the enemy's main position, covering the approach of the main force. He believed that Wessen's army was extremely fearful of death, and the artillery would scare them away. Little Franz simply smiled at the enemy artillery. Frederick had previously considered selling these bronze muzzle-loading cannons, at least to ships to defend against pirates, so Springfield Arsenal had manufactured several. However, after testing, they found that their performance and price were inferior to jet mortars. Their biggest drawback was heat dissipation, requiring them to stop and cool down after frequent firing. Unbeknownst to others, in a backup headquarters, Dragaces, his loyalists, and those who had come to surrender were visibly pale. A massive iron ball falling from the sky would have been a formidable threat. The enemy approached. In the front were the Ghazi Empire's musketeers, followed by spearmen, and in the third were the magicians and archers. The magicians were holding up shields to protect against ranged attacks. Young Franz gave the order, "Mortars attack the enemy's magic shields and magicians. P-lancers on the first line of defense, fire short bursts of fire once their shields are broken." Soon, black dots flew up from the battlefield, charging towards the enemy. Archers in the ground formation suddenly drew their bows and fired, as if to intercept the mortar shells. It must be said that the Phocas archers were indeed well trained. By the time the mortar shells reached the top of the flight, all of them had their bows fully drawn and were firing into the air. The Wesson army was astonished by this maneuver. It was actually possible. As a result, 2 mortar shells were hit by the fuses and exploded in mid-air. For the Phocas side, this was completely useless. The Wesson mortars used a 3-shot rapid-fire attack against the enemy's magic shields, the first 2 to break the shields, the third to inflict damage. The shells exploded in the enemy's formation, failing to achieve the desired effect. Smart, young Franz couldn't help but praise the enemy. The Wesson army was developing, and others were studying them. At the moment the shells were about to land, the enemy all lay down or crouched. Although the troops were a little confused, casualties were minimized. At this time, Alda issued the latest order, and the entire army suddenly stood up and ran back, but there was no chaos. Little Franz frowned, confused about what the enemy was doing. Was it just a test fire? Alda couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when he saw that the main force had run back. He and Phocas discussed it for a while, and after spending more than an hour adjusting the formation, they launched another attack. This time they were divided into many companies, each consisting of 50 musketeers, 200 cold weapon warriors, and 1 or 2 magicians. The men in the company stood more loosely, with a large distance between them. Under the cover of the renewed artillery fire, they trotted forward with their backs bent. On the lakeside hillock, Frederick nodded and said, "Now the enemy has learned their lesson." "This is getting interesting," Eugene said with some concern. "This will reduce our advantage." "Don't worry," Frederick smiled. "It's bound to happen sooner or later. This reminds us not to rest on our laurels after a small advantage. Others will develop and catch up." Then, little Franz gave his latest order, "Hit hard." The mortars began firing. This time, the enemy's magic shield provided early warning. Upon hearing the explosion overhead, everyone below immediately lay down, waiting for the remaining shells to explode before rising and continuing the attack. However, the enemy was preoccupied with their heads and not the front. A torrential rain of bullets came from the front, quickly knocking the fastest enemies to the ground. Snipers began to target the enemy magicians. Those who climbed down were the best targets. Phocas's cavalry moved. Instead of a confronting Dragace's cavalry on the hillside, They attacked the open slope between the lakeside hillock and the main position, attempting to strike the rear of the main position from there. Little Franz immediately ordered the artillery to suppress the enemy artillery and the cavalry behind the main position to counterattack. Alda was not far from his own artillery position when he suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the sky. The Wesson army was not idle while waiting for the enemy to arrive. The artillery compiled a firing table and only needed to fire according to the data in different wind directions and different areas on the table. The 6 artillery pieces were divided into 2 groups and covered a place where the enemy stored gunpowder with artillery fire. Alda only saw a flash of red light in front of his eyes. When he woke up, he found himself in a tent and it was very noisy outside. Soon after, Phocas's fat body squeezed into the tent. Alda wanted to get up, but was held down by Phocas. "Rest well," Phocas said, his voice calm and comforting, without anger. "We were defeated this afternoon. The infantry couldn't advance, and the cavalry was outmatched by the enemy cavalry. We ran out of powder, so I ordered a retreat, but it doesn't matter. You did well. After the initial setback in the attack on the hill by the lake, you quickly devised a new strategy. Ultimately, our casualties were minimal. The Wesson army didn't pursue us, and we recovered a lot of weapons, including those bronze cannons. Now reinforcements have arrived, as has Håkon. Richardnal didn't show up today, probably because his injuries haven't healed yet. The advantage is ours. Rest well. Once you've rested, we'll figure out a plan. I'll let you lead the next battle." Arda was deeply moved. Though a mere mercenary, he enjoyed Phocas's complete trust, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of valor for his friend. Phocas said a few words and left. Soon, wine and food were served, along with several belly dancers. Arda ate something and then lay quietly to rest, not engaging with the dancers. He was now brewing a new tactic that might prove effective. Chapter 265, Flooding the Army. In the main tent, Phocas sat with his men, his face clouded with gloom. "I know it's a bad place to camp, the ground is too low," Phocas said gravely, "but we're right on the main road, making it easy to retreat. The Wesson army's firepower is too strong. Some of you haven't seen it, but I saw it today. If they go all out, there's no way we can get through. I've held the Ghazi Empire's troops steady, they'll cover the rear." Phocas had fought many battles, and today's battle had left a deep impression on him, especially the final cavalry charge. Under attack from both sides, his cavalry was decimated without even engaging the enemy, even though the infantry had stopped firing mid-fight to save some credit for the cavalry. He was now afraid, and the thought of returning to Constantinople and hiding behind the towering walls arose. Someone in the tent had led the cavalry charge today, saved by his superior equipment, but now he was covered in bandages and had been hit by a bullet in his leg, breaking his shin bone. He was still sitting on the ground in a splint. "Retreat," the man sitting on the ground sighed. "You won't understand if you haven't experienced the hail of bullets from the Wesson army. There was nowhere to hide. I wore 2 layers of plate armor, a layer of chain mail underneath, and a 2-finger-thick armored vest underneath. After the attack, more than a dozen bullets poured out of it, and I broke 3 ribs." Everyone looked at each other. They had fought together for years. Even this brave general, always at the forefront, favored by the emperor, said he couldn't win. Everyone else also felt the same way. Then someone asked Phocas, "Your Majesty, should we move the magic crystal cannons from the city walls, then we should retreat?" Phocas said quickly. "We can use the magic crystal cannons when they gather outside the walls." Constantine's magic crystal cannons were powerful, but also very heavy, making them difficult to dismantle and transport. No one had considered dismantling them. Now that the emperor had spoken, everyone else shared the same sentiment and fell silent. Then the guards announced the arrival of Arda. As Arda entered the tent, a smile immediately broke out on Phocas's face. He said to him with a hint of concern and a hint of complaint, "Why don't you get some rest, Your Majesty?" Arda said excitedly after saluting, "I've come up with a plan. I see the Wesson army isn't very strong, only 1/10 of our total strength. This is our chance. I just went out to take a look. There are quite a few mountains around here. Tomorrow we'll camp along the main road. Your Majesty and the other dukes will find a few nearby hilltops with plenty of water to spread out and camp. My artillery and musketeers are very good at defense. We can deploy some of them to the hilltops. Delaying the Wesson army's attack won't be a problem. The Wesson army is small, so we can only attack from one spot. If we can hold them back there, The rest of us can come out from our respective camps and surround them." Phocas didn't respond immediately, but silently pondered. He had already been considering quitting and even contemplating selling out Arda, but Arda's tactic looked promising and highly feasible. "Okay," Phocas finally made up his mind and pointed to the 5 strongest dukes. "Now, we'll divide our armies into 7 groups. Arda and the conscripts will be 1, my own men will be 1. And the 5 of you will each be 1. Tomorrow, Arda will hold this position, and the other 6 groups will each occupy a hilltop. Like Arda said, the Wesson army is few, and we are many. Whoever the Wesson army attacks, the others must all move out and surround them together. Anyone who dares to dawdle and conserve their strength will be torn apart by my own hands." His men also thought this tactic was a good one, and they immediately swore to the God of Light that they would support anyone in need. After dark, the sturdy barracks were finally built. The soldiers, exhausted from either a crushing defeat or a day's march, quickly fell asleep. Haakon, who was on night duty tonight, sat on the wooden wall, his sharp eyes scanning the dark forest to the north. The Wesson army seemed to have no intention of launching a night attack, and everything remained peaceful until daybreak. Boom, 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 a massive explosion echoed from a kilometer away. Haakon wanted to rise, but he worried the enemy might divert their attention and eventually blow the horn. Chaos erupted in the barracks, but thanks to officer managing the situation, order was soon restored. But what awaited them wasn't Wesson's army, but a flood. At the side of the explosion, Frederick sneered as he gazed at the newly blasted ditch ahead. The lake water, swollen from days of heavy rain, flowed into the 3-meter-wide ditch, surging unstoppably toward the lower reaches. As the water grew, the ditch's walls, already softened by the water, began to collapse, deepening. If they didn't collapse, they would use artillery shells to help. By the time Haakon arrived, a dozen ditches along the lake had merged to form a gap nearly 100 meters wide. A surging torrent of water roared out, eventually forming a waterfall. Richardel stood atop a large tree, wielding a pea-shaped Gatling gun. Its field of influence covered Haakon's position. He smiled and said, "Are you here to surrender?" Haakon, surprised to find Richardel unharmed, asked, "You're not injured? How is that possible? Did Grandma Psyche really come?" Richardel smiled and replied, "Galani was killed single-handedly by my apprentice, Frederick von Wesson. Of course, he was also Psyche's student, so he deserved some help." Haakon remained silent for a moment, then sighed and asked, "Are you still hiring? What are the salaries and benefits?" Richardel smiled and replied, "We wouldn't dare recruit spies from the Ghazi Empire." Haakon's expression remained unchanged, but he didn't object. He simply stood quietly atop the tree, making no movement except to defend against Richardel's field of influence. With a final sigh, he departed south without returning to the barracks. Elsewhere, Phocas ordered his entire army to stand still, but the Wessonians failed to appear. Under the night sky, the sound of galloping horses and the deafening roar of war drums echoed. Water surged from all directions, rising to the men's calves in a flash, and now, knees, threw the entire army into chaos. By sunrise, the entire camp was submerged. People clung to trees, some clinging to floating objects and drifting in the water. Drowned bodies littered the surface, even becoming lifelines for others. The Wessonians appeared on the surrounding high ground. The first captives who made it ashore became their lackeys, while those unwilling to become their lackeys drifted in the water. Those who made it ashore were stripped, bound, and tied. Some held weapons, but the Wessonians unleashed a barrage of bullets before they could even reach shore. Others, terrified, quickly dropped their weapons. Soon, a Wesson raft appeared on the water, tied with ropes and blocks to allow unarmed personnel to pull on them. Only a handful of the Ghazi Empire's guards were rescued and held in solitary confinement. Those with gunnery skills were separated, and the remainder were to be handed over to Prince Dragaces. A group of Wesson soldiers set up a roadblock on the road to Constantine. Anyone who escaped would be shot if they didn't surrender. The sun had risen, and no one could run that far. Officers and soldiers took turns eating breakfast, consuming dry rations with water. Eugene had been assigned to garrison duty, and he brought along the men who had shoveled horse manure with him on the boat. Metzger said as he ate, "I think we can catch a big fish." Eugene shook his head and said, "I don't think so. I know those nobles better. They'll surrender immediately if they get a ransom." Metzger didn't comment. After a moment's thought, he said, "If anyone wants to avoid us, they'll go around us. I'll take a few men and hide there. If anyone tries to escape, Notify us. Eugene thought it made sense and agreed. Metzger and his men set off. Less than 10 minutes later, gunfire was heard ahead, and a flare signaling a need for medics went up in the sky. Startled, Eugene immediately led his men over. Worth it, Wesson state curse. Give me some painkillers first. Metzger lay on the ground, grimacing in pain, his chest bleeding. His injuries were horrific, 2 cross-cutting cuts across his chest, and the silver scale breastplate he had removed nearby was damaged, but only the muscles were injured, not the bones. The medic immediately used alcohol soaked with medicinal herbs to rinse his wound, and the pain made the butcher scream like the pigs he had slaughtered before. Eugene pressed his shoulder and asked to distract him, "What happened just now?" Metzger replied, "Not long after I got here, I saw a man fatter than a pig. He must be an important figure because he is so fat, so I went over to stop him. Be gentle. That fat guy is at least a good warrior. Those 2 daggers, Wesson state curse, are magical weapons. The breastplate was broken in one go. I was injured even though I used an iron vest, and now, Wesson state curse, I'm being abused by this kid." The medic smiled and replied, "Who, Wesson state curse, told you that all the braised pork you gave me last time was pig nipples?" Metzger was speechless. The wound was slowly cleaned, stitched, and medicated. The medic told him, "This is an injury from a magical weapon. I don't know if there are other injuries. I won't give you any painkillers, lest you miss any abnormalities and delay treatment." Metzger was so angry that the freshly stitched wound nearly burst. Eugene went to examine the body. Metzger, while wounded, had emptied his revolver into him, 1 bullet hitting the heart, killing him instantly. 3 other bodies lay nearby, killed by Metzger's men. "You caught a whale, boy," Eugene said to Metzger enviously. "The one you killed must be Phocas. He was still wearing the Emperor's ring." Frederick released the lake, and in half a day, the 70,000-man army was wiped out, leaving only about 10,000 survivors. Phocas perished in the wilderness. Constantine surrendered upon hearing the news, and the Duke of Wesson became a world-renowned figure. None of the 10,000 guards of the Ghazi Empire who were equipped with the latest weapons for actual combat testing on the battlefield survived. Upon hearing the news, Ghazi Emperor Murad vomited blood and fainted. A few days later, he died after shouting, "Wesson, give me back my guards" 3 times. The new emperor Fatih wrote Wesson's name on the bottom of his robe, and children in the country stopped crying when they heard the name. Chapter 266 The End of the War. On the day the army arrived outside the walls of Constantinople, the rain completely dissipated, and the sky was remarkably clear. That morning, the ancient city resounded with resounding song. Amidst countless falling petals, Prince Dragaces, clad in purple robes, entered the city side by side with Duke Wesson, followed by a mighty army. They marched along the main road to the imperial palace. The Pope of the Church of Light had already arrived in Constantinople aboard the Flying Tulip and immediately presided over the enthronement ceremony for Dragaces upon his arrival at the palace. With the new emperor of the East Piran Empire seated on the throne, it was time to reward those who had made the most contributions. Duke Wesson, undeniably, took the lead, and His Majesty Dragaces conferred upon him the title of Prince of Galata. His fiefdom encompassed the Galata region, across the strait from Constantinople, covering over 1,000 square kilometers. Next came the loyalists around Dragaces, divided into 3 groups. The first group, those who had followed the emperor before the expedition; the second group, and those who joined him after Phocas's death. Finally, the meritorious men of the Wesson army, from Franz the Younger and Helmut at the head of the command, to Alfred, who destroyed the Ghazi Empire's fleet, and Metzger, who killed Phocas, all received substantial bounties and honorary titles. After ascending the throne, Dragaces spent 2 weeks stabilizing the situation in Constantinople before setting out with his newly recruited army to consult the local landowners in the west. The political maneuvering behind this had nothing to do with Frederick. His position was now both detached and sensitive, and some were secretly encouraging him to simply kill Dragaces and become emperor himself. Frederick had no time to care about these people, so he tied them up and handed them over to Dragaces to be done with. For now, the most important thing for Frederick was to spend more time with Mary. "I'll leave the day after tomorrow," Mary told Frederick. "The wind's favorable now, I'll take the boat back to my territory." Frederick patted her gently on the back, offering no entreaties. Mary was essentially a military observer, and now that the battle was over, it was time to return. Frederick said, "Next, I'll visit the kingdom of Kush, then explore the Lindhay, then the Kingdom of Sardinia, and maybe even the Helvetic Confederation and the Kingdom of Gaul. He had long wanted to explore the world. Now that the second 5-year plan for the territory had been arranged, the surrounding area was relatively peaceful for the time being. Since he had traveled so far, he decided to take the opportunity to explore the surrounding areas. By the time he returned, the Wesson state would be expanding, and by then, he wouldn't be able to travel around. Mary rested her face against Frederick's chest and whispered, "I'd like to go with you, but Father's health is failing." Frederick embraced her and said, "I understand." He would no longer pass through the Osmag Empire on this trip. Their status was too sensitive to allow them to meet again. On a bright morning, Mary kissed Frederick and, without looking back, boarded the ship and departed. Soon after, someone else was leaving. Lulu told Frederick, "I'm going out to sea in 3 days. I've discovered a golden route these past few days. Let's make some money before anyone else discovers it." Frederick, who was cutting her hair, listened and said, "The Emperor gave me a large sum of money. I'll give it all to you as capital. The extra is in the treasury for you to take." After retaking Constantinople, Dragaces had raided the homes of many rebels and distributed the proceeds as rewards, so Frederick naturally had a lot to spare. Lulu asked him, "Won't you save some for your journey?" Frederick replied, "I've saved enough. It's enough, and I can even work along the way." He had decided to travel incognito to avoid trouble and had also taken some valuable gems with him for emergencies. Frederick continued, "If necessary, you can take the Lexington and Saratoga with you. They can carry more cargo and can be considered as sea training." He now has his own port in the Galata district. The Navy can only use this place as a base for some time to come, so the two flat tops will not go back. These days, the Navy are all part-time pirates and merchants, so they were temporarily given to Lulu to use. "Okay," Lulu said, "now we don't know how the Ghazi Empire will react. Hayreddin has allied with us. I can take this opportunity to set up my own chamber of commerce in the inland sea." "Yes," Frederick helped her brush away the broken hair on her shoulders. "You have the final say on matters at sea. I have placed 1,000 people in the Galata district. You can mobilize 300 people when necessary." Lulu hesitated and asked, "Isn't this a bad idea?" She understood the sensitivity of military power very well. She was just a family merchant of the Wesson family. Mobilizing the army was against the rules, even if she had another identity. "That's all right," Frederick said. "I'll establish an armed protection guild to train personnel for naval warfare. That's the path we'll take when the time comes. The shipyard will produce more armed ships, and I'll give you priority. Go ahead with the maritime affairs. Money and manpower aren't a problem. It's up to you to achieve great things." Lulu nodded excitedly. With all the support Frederick had given her, it would be a shame if she didn't accomplish something significant. "Thank you," she whispered. "I used to think you'd keep me in a cage." Frederick just smiled and pinched Lulu's nose. Such thoughts had never crossed his mind. He believed it was normal for a woman to have her own career. Besides Lulu, he also planned to let Maria find something she enjoyed, not just idle away her time at tea parties and dances like other ladies. By the time Dragaces returned with his troops on the armed parade, the Wesson army had already evacuated, except for the 1,000 deployed in the Galata district. Frederick and a few others were digging a pit in someone else's garden. This mansion had been purchased a few years earlier by a wealthy businessman, who was now overseas, leaving only the grandmother at home. When Dragaces, curious, arrived, Frederick was chatting and laughing with the grandmother. The grandmother, now in her 90s, was nicknamed a storyteller by the neighbors. Today, with Prince Wesson as their guest, she brought out all her talents, regaling him with stories that left him grinning from ear to ear. Dragaces arrived and asked Frederick, "What treasure are you digging for?" Frederick smiled and replied, "This was Manuel's house. He hid some hidden money in the garden and didn't have time to take it away. He knew we were coming back, so he sent Tony to take it back." As they spoke, Tony and his men unearthed several fist-sized jars, each filled with gold coins. Dragaces, who knew Manuel, couldn't help but laugh when he heard the story. Chapter 267 Retire after success. Manuel's hidden stash was quickly recovered. Frederick had Tony restore the garden, gave the old woman some Wesson specialties as gifts, and then left with Dragaces. They returned to the palace and entered the reception room, where they were alone, with a clerk taking notes. Dragaces personally poured Frederick a glass of wine and asked with a sly smile, "Did you enjoy yourself?" The emperor had heard of Frederick's experiences in Wayne and assumed he would be enjoying himself here as well. Frederick, after taking a sip of wine, shook his head. I haven't left the house or received any guests while you were gone. Dragaces sat down on the sofa and said, you don't have to be so cautious. I don't trust you, do you? Who knows? Frederick smiled. Being emperor isn't just a one-man show. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll be asleep and suddenly a group of people will come and give me a purple robe, fearing I might catch a cold. Then they'll bring me to the palace and place me on the throne. And then I'll be emperor. Dragaces could only smile bitterly. Such a thing wasn't impossible. There was always a shortage of political investors. You still have a long way to go, Frederick said after taking another sip of wine. You haven't demonstrated your strength. You can't convince people that you're a good emperor. I'm already well known, so it's natural for others to choose me. Yes, Dragaces nodded. In fact, I've been prepared for you to take the throne from the beginning. Frederick rolled his eyes, and the clerk recorded it. I want to bring in some factories, Dragaces said seriously to Frederick. I'm planning to emulate the reforms of Wesson, but I can't do that without money. Only by building factories can we make money. Frederick nodded and said, that's a good idea. Have someone talk to Ahmed. The Ministry of Industry can take the lead. I'm also planning to build an industrial park in the Galata district. We can work together to save construction companies from running around. Do you want a steam tractor? I can sell it to you at a discount. Dragaces had seen the efficiency of steam tractors and naturally wanted one. He also wanted other steam engines. Frederick agreed without hesitation. Wesson was currently planning an industrial upgrade during its third 5-year plan, replacing low-horsepower steam engines with lightweight and efficient gas explosion engines. Those used ones would be perfect for Dragaces. With the slow pace of this world, a few years of wrangling between the two sides while we selected a side and built a factory would pass, making the timing perfect. At this point, Frederick, the capitalist, bared his fangs. Managing a factory is no easy feat. You know there have been quite a few accidents in factories in Wesson over the years. So, I suggest you send some trusted individuals to us to learn why the factory is still under construction, from office managers, finance, and materials managers to technicians and skilled workers working on the machines. All of these skills require time to develop. You can recruit some of the second-born sons and daughters of families who have joined you and don't have inheritance rights to study with me, starting at the technical school. I'll charge the local tuition, with only a slightly lower internship wage. Once the factory is built, they'll be able to resume full production as soon as they return. Dragaces was fooled by his deception. Especially the selection of second-born sons and daughters without inheritance rights. If these individuals weren't arranged into marriages, they would typically receive an estate and marry someone similar for the rest of their lives, earning a pitiful income. If they were allowed to manage the factory, with a decent income and the respectability of being under the emperor's wing, they would become a powerful force for the emperor. After discussing this, Dragaces became a little shy about what was next. There's something. I'm marrying the queen at the end of the year. Oh, Frederick laughed. Congratulations. Which family is she from? Dragaces blushed and replied, she's from an ancient family in the western city of Acropolis. Frederick nodded. From Athens, while nominally part of the Eastern Plains Empire, it wasn't very obedient. A marriage between the emperor and a family there would strengthen the ties between the two. He had long suspected Dragaces' wedding, so he had already prepared the gifts and immediately sent someone back to get them. Frederick handed Dragaces a booklet and said with a sly grin, your most important task right now is to quickly father an heir with the queen. This can help you. Dragaces took the booklet and asked curiously, what is this? Frederick chuckled and said, this is a secret technique brought back by Lady Sophie of the Kingdom of Kush when she sent a fleet to Peach Blossom Stone 2 years ago. The author is the owner of a manor called Behu Manor, nicknamed the Pig Emperor, who has commanded the submission of countless powerful female warriors there. I've translated it for you. Dragaces flipped through a few pages, a smile that only men can understand on his face as he quickly tucked the booklet away. I see, he said to Frederick, grinning. So you're so powerful in Wayne City because you learned this? Frederick smiled but said nothing. He had originally wanted Psyche to translate the secret book, but she thought he had some inappropriate intentions and beat him like a pig. All right, Frederick stood up. You'll have your work cut out for you. It's time for me to leave. Dragaces was taken aback and said hastily, shouldn't you stay a few days longer? I haven't had time to hold a banquet just for you. Frederick shook his head and said, "No need. Constantine has returned to the emperor's arms. My reputation is now great, and the reputation of the Wesson state is also growing. My mission is accomplished, and it's time for me to leave. In a country, the most famous person who isn't the emperor is a powder keg ready to explode at any moment. Dragaces had promised to reward him with the restoration funds from the royal library. Now he was busy and had no time to withdraw them, so Frederick had to flee immediately to avoid the embarrassment of discovering that all the gold and silver were gone. Frederick left the next day, dressed in ordinary clothes, carrying ordinary weapons and luggage. A circle of gold coins and small gems were sewn into his underwear waistband, and he didn't even take his ring of authority. He said goodbye to Dawn, left his residence, and boarded a ship bound for the kingdom of Kush. Unfortunately, his ship encountered a storm midway, which blew it off course and landed it in the city of Wanjing in the Ghazi Empire, hundreds of kilometers from the kingdom of Kush. Frederick thought, since he was traveling anyway, he might as well take it all in, so he disembarked. Chapter 268 First arrival at Wanjing City. Wanjing City was the southernmost large port city of the Ghazi Empire on the inland sea. It was situated between the sea and the mountains. Meltwater and rainfall from the mountains flowed into the sandy land. There were no rivers on the ground, and locals mainly dug wells for water. As soon as Frederick disembarked, he noticed that the local customs and people were different from those in Wesson. The most striking difference was that the people here had darker skin, like Madame Sophie and Susan. The sun here was also much stronger than in the north, so people wore headscarves for sun protection and wore mostly light-colored clothing. Everyone leaving the port and entering the city had to pay taxes. Frederick had a few copper and silver coins from the Ghazi Empire in his purse, and he had to dig through them for a while before he could find them and pay the tax. Because he was not a local by the look of his skin, an officer took him away for questioning. Frederick, gifted with languages and fluent in several, responded to the officer's question with a distinctly authentic Brusa accent, the capital of the Ghazi Empire. "My name is Charles Smith, and I'm a student at the University of Wiesenberg in the Wesson region of the Rhine Confederation. I'm currently traveling around looking for a good job." This was his cover story, along with his accompanying ID and student's ID, which he presented to the officer. These days, nationalism was rare, and emigrating to join other nobles was commonplace. Eugene of the Wesson army had similarly fled from the kingdom of Gaul, and his family was a prominent noble, so no one saw anything unusual. The officer looked at Frederick's figure carefully and asked, "Have you been a soldier?" Frederick knew that his figure could not be hidden from the experts, so he replied, "I used to be a clerk for the principal." The officer frowned and asked, "Clerks also have to practice martial arts?" "Of course," Frederick replied, "in the army, let alone us clerks, even cooks have to run 5 kilometers every day to exercise." The officer looked as if he had suddenly realized something inside. "No wonder you are so powerful, even the guards can't beat you. Why don't you work in the army? I heard that your salary is very high." "Don't say any more," Frederick sighed. "Someone who is better than me came, and I couldn't beat him, so I came out to try my luck." The officer suddenly asked cautiously, "Could that man be a devil?" Frederick immediately shook his head and said, "I said no. It's up to you whether you believe it or not." The officer shuddered, looked at him carefully, and thought he was not a devil, so he let him go. Frederick entered the city and, as soon as he stepped out of the gate, was immediately surrounded by a group of people, all clamoring for him to choose one. It took him a while to understand that these were local tour guides, offering directions and information to outsiders seeking accommodation or shopping, all for just 10 copper coins a day. The currency and prices here differed from those in Wesson. 10 copper coins barely covered a family of 3's worth of grain porridge, and the tour guide's only real income came from kickbacks from merchants. A sudden, hungry sound echoed from the crowd, and Frederick, moved by pity, chose her. The tour guide's name, meaning Olive, was local for Olive. She was about Frederick's age, short and thin, with a burn scar the size of 2 fingers on the left side of her cheek. "Let's go eat first," Frederick said to Olive. "I'm hungry, too." Olive immediately gestured to invite him, saying in accented Pulin, "Sir, this way." Being a tour guide always required some foreign language skills. Near the harbor gates lies the commercial district, home to numerous restaurants. Blackboards framed the entrances, their menus and prices written in colorful chalk. Frederick curled his lips, surprised that a Wesson-style tradition had spread so quickly. Olive, noticing the owner's high-quality Wesson cotton clothing, recommended a mid-range restaurant. Frederick, A traveler who wouldn't skimp on food, clothing, and lodging, inquired whether the restaurant accepted Kushite currency and took Olive to a private rooftop seating area. Perhaps due to the fragile foundations, the city's buildings are relatively low, the tallest being only 2 stories high, with awnings covering the rooftop balconies. The restaurant's rooftop is surrounded by greenery, and the sea breeze was quite strong today, making dining there a truly relaxing experience. The owner presented the menu, handwritten on Wesson paper and laminated with slime glue, giving it a very upscale look. Frederick, taking the menu, inquired about the preparation of the dishes and ultimately ordered the most expensive dishes. Both the owner and Olive smiled. The boss went downstairs, and Olive followed, asking for a kickback and some food. "Hey, why are you leaving?" Frederick called to Olive, pointing to a chair across the table. "Sit down. I have something to ask you." "Let's eat together later." Olive immediately refused in panic. "I dare not share the table with the master," Frederick said sternly. "I am the master now, and I have the final say. If you don't obey, I won't pay you, and I will also ask the boss not to give you a kickback." Olive hesitated, but finally sat down at the table. Frederick had the waiter pour her a glass of yogurt. After she finished, he asked, "What's the most profitable business in the city lately?" Olive replied cautiously, "The most profitable one lately is the Wesson Chamber of Commerce, which opened not long ago. They've brought in a shipment of spices. If we can buy them and sell them inland, it's very profitable." Frederick nodded. This was Lulu's handiwork, but it wasn't a business that suited her. Olive glanced at Frederick's longsword, which lay on the table, and continued, "There's a knight's tournament in the city in 5 days. The first place winner will receive 200 gold coins." Frederick raised an eyebrow and asked, "Can I sign up?" Olive replied, "Anyone who can pass the tournament instructor's review is welcome. The registration fee is 10 silver coins." Frederick nodded, deciding to give it a try. The gold coins here are smaller than those in Wesson, containing 80% of the gold of a florin, about 2.8 grams. 200 of them is a lot. A knight here earns about that much a year, enough for him to live comfortably for a long time. Rich Hardner had also said that he wanted him to spar with the warriors from all over the country to broaden his horizons. He said to Olive, after dinner, "Take me to exchange money, then register and find temporary accommodation." Olive took note and asked, "Would you like to stay in a hotel or a house with a courtyard?" Frederick understood after a few inquiries. Many sea merchants would stay here for a while. These people had many followers and considerable wealth, so the city had houses for them to stay for a few days or even months. He asked about the approximate rent and said, "Let's rent a house. It's quieter." Hotels were a mixed crowd and prone to trouble, so spending a little money on a house was more secure. After all, there was a guarantee of winnings at the tournament, so there was no need to worry about running out of money. Olive then asked, "Master, would you like to buy a slave girl to take care of my daily needs?" Frederick shook his head and asked, "Can I hire you to help me for a while?" Olive thought for a moment, then bit her lip and nodded in agreement. The restaurant then brought in the meal, filling the table. The main course was freshly baked flatbread and hummus. The main course was a mixed grilled meat, including chicken, lamb, beef, and pork. The vegetable was pickled sweet radish root, which was not too sweet and was still very soft. The side dish was grape leaves wrapped with vegetables and meat filling, which tasted pretty good. The drink was aniseed wine, which tasted pretty good. Olive only dared to eat the cheapest hummus, so Frederick asked the waiter to put a small half of the grilled meat in a bowl for her. During this time, Frederick got Olive's background. The girl's home was originally an olive oil workshop outside the city. A few years ago, a fire broke out and the savings of several generations were burned down. Her face was also burned. "I want to save some money for the trip to Wesson," Olive said as she ate the last piece of grilled meat. "I heard that there is gold everywhere there, and you can make a lot of money even if you wash dishes." Frederick frowned, wondering if the external publicity in recent years was a bit too much. Chapter 269 Slaves with Similar Experiences. In Wanjing City lies an ancient tournament arena, a legacy of the Purin Empire, still in use today. Name, Charles Smith. Gender, decide, then take off your pants. Male, the person registering Frederick was an instructor at the arena. He normally teaches the warriors, some of whom earn money competing in the tournaments, while others learn martial arts and find jobs. Today, the instructor had a dark circle under his left eye, the result of a beating while testing Frederick's eligibility. "Here's a badge for you." The instructor tossed a bronze one to Frederick, numbered 250. You're quite capable, the instructor said. With that move, getting into the top 32 shouldn't be a problem. If someone asks you to rig a match before that, you'd better see if they're offering you enough. The tournament here is held every 2 years. Some compete for the prize money, while others for the ranking, which promises better pay. This year's competition awarded 200 gold coins to first place, 150 to second place, 100 to the semifinals, 80 to the quarterfinals, 60 to the round of 16, 30 to the round of 32, and 10 to the round of 64. After that, there were no more places, meaning the 10 silver coin registration fee wasted. Some people were seeking wealth. If someone had the quality to make the top 32 but not the top 16, giving them 50 gold coins to fix the match wouldn't be a problem. Frederick thanked him bitterly for the reminder, but he had no intention of fixing the match. After all, there was no money to be made after this opportunity. He couldn't just go to Kush and tell Madame Sophie, "I have your daughter Susan. Please give me some money." Madame Sophie was what Frederick, a pagan outsider, called her. In Kush, she was called the Queen Mother. Such an act would result in being stoned and thrown into the river. As Frederick left the arena, he saw Olive waiting for him outside the gate. He went over and asked, "Have you found a house?" Olive nodded and replied, "Yes, it's a little far from here, but we can move in right now." The distance didn't matter, a place to stay for the time being was all that mattered. He had just seen several people who had signed up, each possessed unique skills and concealed their abilities. They should have a great time fighting this time. Olive led him to the house, and on the way they passed a slave market. Due to cultural and religious reasons, slaves were rare in the north, primarily prisoners of war and those who couldn't pay their debts. Large-scale slave trades like this were rare. Frederick decided to take a look around and found that there were men, women, and children for sale here. Most of them were prisoners of war, but there were also some bankrupt merchants and family members. Their eyes were as pale as if they were salted fish. He walked to the largest stall in the middle of the market. There, hanging from a rack, was a wooden cage. The cage contained a young girl, only symbolically wrapped in a thin veil. She was about 16 or 17, with dark blonde hair that was a little dry. The owner of the place, noticing Frederick's impressive appearance and impressive presence, and considering he was mainly from out of town, personally came to greet him. "What would you like to buy?" The owner appeared affable. "We have everything here." Not long ago, even the Wesson Chamber of Commerce bought some people who knew how to write and calculate. Frederick remained silent. Since it was Lulu's doing, he supported her unconditionally. She knew more about business than he did. He chatted with the owner for a moment, then pointed at the girl in the wooden cage and asked, "Who is she?" The owner, seeing Frederick's intentions, immediately replied, "She's Thelma, the only daughter of that scumbag Alda of the guards. Because her father has such a bad reputation, no one wants to buy her." Frederick, feeling a pang of anger, looked up and saw the girl's gaze brimming with rage, as if she could burn the owner to ashes. The owner continued angrily, "If it weren't for that scumbag Alda's cowardice, how could our thousands of elite and invincible guards have been annihilated?" "Shut up," Frederick shouted, startling the owner. Then he asked expressionlessly, "How much?" The owner, unsure of his anger but determined to do business, held out his right hand, spreading all the fingers. "If you're serious about buying, I'll give you 600 gold coins." Frederick counted twice. The guy actually had 6 fingers on his right hand. He didn't have that much gold on him, but the gems he had kept as a reserve were more than enough, having just been appraised at the bank run by the Abelardo family. "Is that enough?" Frederick produced several large, gleaming gems, worth a little over 600 gold coins. "Enough, enough." The owner, dismissing the gems, immediately had the wooden cage lowered and the slave contract and a white robe brought out. It had been a display, but now that it was sold, it needed to be packaged. Thelma was a little weak from the sun, so Frederick asked Olive to support her. Before leaving, Frederick solemnly told the owner, General Arda was an outstanding general. He nearly cornered the Duke of Wesson's army. He ultimately refused surrender, cried "Long live the Emperor," and then committed suicide in front of Brusa. He then took out his ID card, showing it the red background with a gold double-headed eagle, and said, "I am the Duke of Wesson's secretary." I was there. With that, Frederick left the slave market with Olive and Thelma, leaving the owner and a few onlookers stunned. The three of them walked for about 10 minutes to the house Olive had found. The landlord had been waiting there for a long time. Frederick agreed on the rent, paid a month's deposit, and moved in. The house, covering over 30 square meters, had a living room dining room on the first floor, along with a kitchen. The second floor housed the bedroom, toilet, and bathroom, which surprisingly even had a single bathtub. The third floor offered a terrace with an awning and a water tank. A hand-pumped system brought water from the downstairs cistern and piped it down to the lower level. There was a small garden in front of the building, large enough for a carriage. The house contained simple furniture and kitchen utensils. Frederick gave Olive money to buy food, bedding, and other household items, as well as some cloth and rope to enclose the terrace, where he needed to exercise. Frederick was quite satisfied with the house, but diagonally across the street was a steam bakery with a radio antenna on the roof, undoubtedly the steam bakery's headquarters. When he returned from his stroll, he saw Therma sitting in a chair at the dining table on the first floor. Seeing him, Therma asked cautiously, "Master, is what you just said true?" Frederick sat down beside her, nodded, and said, "Absolutely true. This is no secret within the Wesson army." After the battle, they interrogated the prisoners and learned the tactics Arda had proposed to Phocas shortly before the flood. The staff deduced that if Phocas and his men had actually occupied several hilltops at that time, the Wesson army would have needed to deploy Kirov airships to attack them. Coupled with Arda's on-the-spot tactical adjustments, Frederick genuinely considered recruiting the thieves, but he ultimately preferred death to surrender. The slave master's words reminded Frederick of his father, who had also been blamed and smeared, and he flew into a rage. Thelma threw herself into Frederick's arms and sobbed. She had never believed her father was a coward, but the higher-ups were determined to find someone responsible for the annihilation of 10,000 guardsmen, and she was powerless to change the situation. Now that someone could prove her father wasn't a coward or a scumbag, her grief was instantly vented. Chapter 270 The dispute begins. Olive had bought the daily necessities and was setting up the place with Therma. Frederick looked at the new purchases with a touch of pride. August is the hottest month in Wanjing City, with temperatures exceeding 30 degrees Celsius at noon and at least 22 degrees Celsius at night. The beds consisted of just a sheet and a blanket. Mosquitoes were plentiful here, so the doors and windows needed to be covered with breathable gauze, and mosquito coils were used to repel the mosquitoes before bed. The bedding, gauze, and bath towels Olive had bought were all from the Wesson Cotton Textile Printing and Dyeing Factory No. 2. The tableware was also made from slime-hardened plastic, exported from Wesson State. The bowls, plates, and spoons, as well as the buckets and wash basins, were also made there. Even the knives and forks were stamp products. After they finished setting up, Therma took over the dinner preparations. Frederick called Olive over to inquire about the sales. Olive brought a chair over and sat down next to Frederick, leaning in as if to lean into his embrace. Frederick said helplessly, "Why don't you just sit on my lap?" And then Olive actually sat on his lap. The girl was small, thin, and light. "Why?" Frederick raised his eyebrows. "Aren't you afraid that I'll fuck you right now?" Olive blushed and said, "As long as the master takes me to Wesson, I can do whatever I want." Frederick laughed, pinched her face and said, "Oh, you really want to go to Wesson?" Olive nodded desperately, put her arm around Frederick's neck and said, "You guys can earn 2 or 3 gold coins a year by doing some work handing out flyers in Wesson, and you can eat all-you-can-eat fried chicken for 10 copper coins. It's much better than here where we can't even get enough beans." "Okay, just take me there, I'll do whatever you want me to do." "Okay," she said, rubbing her face against Frederick's chest. Frederick was speechless and could only say, "I'm going to Kush next, and I'll give you enough to take a boat to Wesson." Olive, upon hearing that she could finally go to Wesson, happily hugged Frederick and kissed him. Soon after, Therma prepared dinner, white rice, accompanied by a stew of minced meat, gourd, and sweet radish. Frederick praised the meal profusely. After dinner, the three of them bathed, and Therma scrubbed off half a pound of mud. She felt much fresher. Fortunately, she had been a high-end commodity and didn't have fleas, otherwise she would have had to deal with another round of trouble. Unsure what to do with Thelma, Frederick asked her while washing her hair, "What are your plans for the future?" Thelma seemed stunned for a moment, then asked Frederick in disbelief, "Master, you don't want me anymore?" Frederick scratched her scalp and said, "I never intended to make you my slave. I bought you simply to vent my anger at those people's blasphemy against a hero, so you are free to go wherever you want." Thelma was silent for a long time. Only after Frederick rinsed the ash from her hair with clean water did she whisper, "I want to return to my hometown and avenge my father's reputation." Frederick saw that her fists were clenched so tightly that they were shaking. Once she relaxed, Frederick sent Olive to fume the bedroom to get rid of the mosquitoes. They were alone in the small bathroom, and Frederick closed and locked the door. "Remember what I said?" Frederick put his mouth close to Therma's ear and whispered. "The raw materials of the gunpowder used by the guards are charcoal, sulfur, and saltpeter. The proportion is such that making them into granules can increase the power. The method is, the emergence and spread of gunpowder is an inevitable trend, and it does not pose much threat to Frederick, who is studying gun cotton, so just speed up the spread and muddy the water." Therma was frightened. In the Ghazi Empire, the method of making gunpowder has always been a top secret. She once asked her father out of curiosity, but she was locked in the room and starved for 3 days and 3 nights. After she came out, all the slaves around her were replaced with new ones, and all the original ones were hanged for espionage. "How did you know?" Therma asked Frederick tremblingly, for fear that he would say that his father told him. Frederick gently pinched her cheek, dried her hair, and replied with a smile, "It's not that difficult. We already made it years ago, but since better things have become available, we haven't used it much and have made toys out of it." Selma felt a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, she was relieved that her father hadn't leaked the secret, and on the other, something that her father considered so important was nothing to others. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she turned and hugged Frederick. A night passed, and the book doesn't repeat itself. The next day, just after dawn, Frederick was already up and filling the water tank on the roof with a pump. The weather was so hot, water consumption was high. He had to take cold showers every morning and evening, and at noon, he'd splash water on the roof and the room to cool it down. Not long after, Olive, who had overslept, hurried out to buy groceries. There were no refrigerators here, so the vegetables were fine, but fresh meat didn't keep long, so it was only slaughtered in the early morning and afternoon. Frederick also took advantage of the warm weather to go out for a walk and browse the local market. There is a market near the residence, which is not for sea merchants, but for local residents. The goods sold here are all daily necessities, from firewood, rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar and tea, to cloth, needles and thread, tableware, stationery, paper, and there are also several tailor shops. Frederick's neck was burning hot from the sun wearing northern clothes, so he decided to buy a local coat. He passed by several shops and looked at one that he thought was good, so he walked in. The boss was very enthusiastic. After agreeing on the style and price, he started to measure the size. At this time, the tailor shop was suddenly full of people, men and women, old and young, all wearing tattered clothes, their faces covered with dust, and everyone holding 1 or 2 rolls of cloth in their arms, staring at the boss eagerly. Frederick asked the boss curiously, "Who are they?" "We sell cloth," the boss said disdainfully. "They are all homespun cloth woven at home. They are coarse and loose, not like Wessenbush, which is light and fine, and cheaper. Since you are from the north, you should know about Wessenbush. I heard that it is a cloth woven with magic." Tisk, that kind of cloth was only used by the emperor in the past. I heard that beggars there dress better than the emperor. Nowadays, those who have some money in the city wear clothes made of Wessenbush. And only those who farm and move things wear homespun clothes because they are durable. After hearing this, Frederick just said softly, "So that's the case," thinking that the dispute between homemade cloth and foreign cloth has also appeared in port cities. The conflict between homespun and machine-woven cloth was a microcosm of the conflict between agricultural and industrial societies. Within the Ghazi Empire, homespun cloth briefly enjoyed a substantial market share at the grassroots level. Far from the ports, machine-woven cloth's price didn't offer a clear advantage due to transportation costs. Furthermore, the limited cloth production capacity of the Wesson state meant the conflict couldn't shake the entire empire, but it was enough to cause some unrest in the port areas. This conflict was even more intense in areas near the Wesson state, where cloth burnings occurred in some areas. Even within the Confederation of the Rhine, some regions imposed high tariffs on imported Wesson cloth out of protectionism. But the wheel of history is relentless. Advanced productivity always crushes backward. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271, Bragging Before the Game. It's so hot, sir, Does every household in your place have an air conditioner? I heard that the whole house becomes color when it's turned on at noon. Olive cleared the dishes on the table and asked questions as usual. Frederick answered casually, an air conditioner is not cheap. It costs several gold coins. It's not cheap, Olive shouted loudly. I heard that the city lord bought a lot of them. Each one costs 30 gold coins. I heard that in Wessenland State, you can make 4 or 5 gold coins a year by giving pedicures and massages. If you eat less and save for a few years, you can buy one. Frederick just smiled, stood up and said, okay, it's time to go to the warrior competition. Seema also stood up and said, I'll go wash the dishes. Let Olive go with you. Frederick nodded. Seema's father had been stationed here before and had many acquaintances. Now his status is different from before, so he would show up as little as possible. Today's tournament was bustling with activity. From dignitaries and luxurious carriages to ordinary citizens in homespun clothing, everyone braved the scorching sun to watch the competition. There was also a gambling game run by the city lord, along with the various nobles and guilds of commerce. While participants were generally prohibited from participating, Frederick had Olive bet on his own victory, and it was no problem. The organizers had already ranked the participants during the registration process. The final 256 participants were selected. The top contenders were ranked as 6-star players. Those with a chance of reaching the semifinals were 5-star, the top 8 4-star, the top 16 3-star, the top 32 2-star, the top 64 1-star, and the rest symbolically a half-star. Frederick's odds of winning were currently 110, his odds of winning his first match were 1.15, and his odds of reaching the round of 16 and the round of 32 both 1.2, indicating that the bookmakers believed his skill level was between 2 and 3 stars. He wasn't about to let go of this money. Last night, he scraped 20 gold coins from the lining of his underwear. Today, he'd let Olive bet on him to win. A tenfold profit, more than enough for him to use a certain magical railgun. This was a samurai tournament, not a magician's tournament. Contestants were forbidden from using magic wands, as were magical weapons and armor. If he could truly unleash this magic wandless, no one would be able to stop him. Each contestant was allowed to bring a servant to serve tea and other supplies. Frederick led Olive to the contestant waiting room. The structure of this arena resembled the ancient Roman Colosseum, with a circular arena about 90 meters in diameter, large enough for magician clashes. The so-called contestant waiting room was actually a series of small rooms enclosed by wooden planks beneath the stands. They barely had room for a double bed, a chair, a kettle, and a cup. Water had to be fetched from the water room. When Olive went to fetch water, a staff member came to check on the personnel. It happened to be the instructor from that day. Name, Charles Smith, number, 250. Do you have to take off your pants so I can confirm your gender? Male. The instructor smiled and said to him, 8 matches will be held simultaneously in the first round, each lasting 10 minutes. The bell will be rung every minute for the first 5 minutes, and twice for the last 5 minutes. You can bring your own weapons. But I have to check if they are magic weapons. You can go to the armory to choose your armor. The winner will be determined by falling to the ground or admitting defeat. If there is no winner, the referee will make the decision. Killing is allowed, but it's best not to kill. Is that okay? Frederick replied, no problem. I already know all this. After that, he handed over his sword and said to the instructor, the scabbard is also a weapon and can be used for defense. The instructor was surprised after taking it and said, wow, it's so heavy. The scabbard is made of steel, no wonder. But you can't wrap the scabbard with cloth during the competition. You have to take it off. Frederick agreed. The instructor untied the linen, drew out the sword, and then took a breath. The sword was a single-edged blade, jet black, 1 meter and 3 meters long. The blade was about the width of a palm at the end, tapering slightly toward the tip. The blade's back was a straight line, about a finger thick, with a shaped tip, somewhat like a reverse box cutter. The scabbard was dark red, open at the end to reveal the blade's back guard, which could be used as a handle like a sword. All elemental steel. The instructor was knowledgeable. Frederick nodded. The blade of the sword was made of spring steel, having undergone a series of heat treatments to achieve low magic resistance, corrosion resistance, hardness, and toughness. The scabbard was reinforced for hardness, heat resistance, and high magic resistance, allowing it to even deflect crude magical attacks. Without a magic circle, it's not a magic weapon. The instructor's face twitched. Without even a magic circle on it, even if it were made of elemental steel, it would still be an ordinary weapon. He asked Frederick, "How much is this sword?" "I'll ask someone to go to Wessenland and buy one for me." Frederick smiled and replied, "This is the standard sword of the Wesson army. Only those who have served in the army can have it. It has a number on it. Those sold on the market are all fake, and the quality and performance of the sword issued to the user are different depending on the warrior level. If you want, you can only join the Wesson army and the armed police, or if you have won an award for outstanding contributions such as bravery, you can apply to buy one." The instructor was stunned and shook his head and said, "Alice, I came back because I have a child at home and don't want to fight anymore. It seems there's nothing I can do." "By the way, what do you mean by warrior level?" Frederick replied, "That's the professional technical level we have there. From carpenters and blacksmiths to warriors and magicians, there are levels, and it depends on the level of skill. Like Sword Saint Richardner, his warrior level is legendary. The magician level of Lord Beecher, the god of magic of the Rhine Alliance Royal Mage Corps, is also legendary. This is the realm of sword masters and magic gods, those warriors who are good at fighting and can beat 3 or 5 ordinary strong men, and those who can only cast magic of the same level as boiling water and fireballs are rough level. Those who can beat 10 rough level warriors and use some magic that can penetrate brick walls are ordinary level. Warriors and magicians who can kill ordinary monsters alone without any injury can be rated as excellent level. The requirements for elite level people like me are even higher. The lower limit is equivalent to killing an ordinary professional infantry sentry on the battlefield alone. To become a higher epic level, you need to see the threshold of legendary level. As he was talking, many contestants gathered around to watch the fun, and talked a lot after listening. A man with a short beard asked Frederick, "What's the point of having these ratings?" Frederick smiled and replied, "They're useful for work. If you're a bodyguard, the boss will see you're an excellent warrior and definitely pay you more than the average warrior. Some bosses clearly state their desired rank when hiring guards, to avoid wasting time on those worthless people. Also, in the military, if you want to become an officer, you have to have a high rank, right?" Some thought this was a good idea, like participating in a martial arts tournament. Rankings have the same effect as rank. Huh? Someone noticed something new. "You just called Sword Saint Richardnell your teacher." The onlookers immediately remembered that this was indeed the case, and their gazes at Frederick became complicated. Most martial arts instructors are only at the average level, passing on their strengths and weaknesses to their students, leaving their ultimate success to their talent and opportunities. Having a good teacher can save you from many mistakes and even prevent premature death. Frederick said with a touch of pride, "Master Richardnell is the head coach of the Wesson Army. Of course, not everyone can receive his instruction. Usually, it's his students who teach, and only those with talent receive personal instruction. Of course, we're no match for Duke Wesson. He's a direct disciple of Master Richardnell. Not long ago, he single-handedly killed a magic god under the false Emperor Phocas. He's incredibly impressive. Master Richardnell is even more impressive. You should have heard about Hakan. He didn't dare to fight the master and ended up running away." The onlookers were amazed. They had heard of Duke Wesson's solo kill of the magic god, but many thought it was just bragging. Now that Richardnell could scare off Master Hakan, his apprentice's story must be true. The match was about to begin, and everyone dispersed. Many began praying to the god of fire to prevent them from encountering the 250. The instructor immediately reported the incident, and Frederick's player level was immediately raised to 6 stars. The odds of winning the championship were increased to 1.8, and the odds of winning the first match were increased to 1.02. Frederick just smiled when he heard it. It was normal for odds to change. Anyway, he bought it at the odds before the change, and the money would be calculated according to the odds on the order. Chapter 272 The Troublemaker is here. The competition began, and the first group of contestants were called out. There were 256 contestants, and the first round consisted of 128 matches, making it impossible to compete one match at a time. The arena, nearly 90 meters in diameter, was divided into 9 sections using a 9-square grid. The center section housed the referee area, while the surrounding 8 sections housed the competition areas. All 8 matches were held simultaneously. The organizers had carefully planned the schedule, separating the high-star contestants as much as possible to prevent them from meeting each other early on. The contestants expected to advance to the top 64 would typically face off against half-star contestants in the early rounds, with a true excitement expected to unfold during the final 32. Each match lasted 10 minutes, with a 5-minute changeover, and the competition was expected to conclude in 4 hours. Frederick was thankful to have arrived early, avoiding the need to compete in the sun later. He was summoned by staff to the armory, where he could collect leather armor and a helmet. However, he declined, having no need for them. It wasn't long before Frederick took the stage, puzzled by the fact that he had 2 opponents. The referee approached, slapped a competitor who hid straight into the wrong spot on the back of the head, and kicked him to the side of the ring. The referee in the middle rang the starting bell, and the young man immediately rushed towards Frederick, weapon drawn. Frederick narrowed his eyes, carefully assessing his opponent. The man was in his 20s, quite burly, and the double-edged battle axe seemed light in his hands. As his opponent approached, Frederick suddenly took 2 steps back and 1 to the right. As a result, the man's steps were misaligned in the attempt to adjust his pace, and he couldn't coordinate his body and force when the axe came down. Because of his wrong body shape, he could only use an awkward position to turn the axe into a horizontal strike after Frederick dodged. This slowed the axe's speed, giving Frederick time to calmly step back and prevent the horizontal strike from missing. Fighting an opponent so far inferior in strength would not gain any experience points, so Frederick decided to end the match quickly. When holding the axe, one hand holds it firmly and the other hand holds it loosely. When the axe chops and misses, Frederick extends the scabbard and knocks the elbow of the opponent's hand holding the axe where the tendon is. The opponent's hand becomes numb and the movement pauses. Then he sees a shoe getting bigger and bigger in front of his eyes. In less than a minute, the match ends with Frederick knocking his opponent unconscious with a kick. The winner of the match can watch the match in the audience seats at the top of the arena, where free tea, wine, happy water and various snacks are provided. In addition, they also have a sign that allows them to eat at the designated sponsored restaurant for free. After Frederick brought Olive here, he asked her to bring some drinks. Soon after, she brought a bottle of happy water. It's never been chilled. Frederick curled his lips. It won't taste good without it. At this time, a strong man sitting not far from him turned around and asked him, "This happy water tastes better only when it's chilled." "Yes," Frederick nodded and said, "you can try it. It tastes best when it's a little higher than the freezing temperature." The strong man immediately turned around and ordered a female slave behind him to get a bottle of happy water, which had to be chilled. "It's really refreshing." The strong man looked very satisfied after taking a sip. What I drank before was wasted. Then he turned to Frederick and asked, "My name is Will, what's yours?" Frederick replied, "My name is Charles Smith, just call me Charles." "Have you never drunk frozen happy water before?" Will shook his head and said, "You are an outsider and don't know. Drinking cold water here can easily upset your stomach." According to those scholars in Wessenland State, there are small insects in cold water that are invisible to the human eye. If there are too many insects in your stomach after drinking it, you will get sick. You don't say. Those scholars in Wessenland State are really amazing. Every household in my place drinks hot water now, and those who sell diarrhea medicine have lost their goods. After speaking, he laughed heartily. Frederick smiled and said, "That's true. But the drinks we sell in Wessenland are all insect-free. As long as they haven't been opened or leaked, you can drink them straight away, even frozen. I thought you guys drink them iced." Given how hot it is here, Will said, "A stomach upset can easily kill people, so I wouldn't do that. But this happy water isn't very good when boiled straight, but it tastes great when you add some fruit to it. You could try it." Frederick listened, fascinated, yet also curious, and decided to give it a try. He then added, "In Wessenland, happy water can be used to make chicken wings. You could try that, too." Although the two chatted, their eyes were fixed on the competition, multitasking, memorizing every move of each contestant. Especially after the first few warm-up rounds, when the highly favored contestants took the stage, they both paused to chat. Although these contestants' battles were often overpowered in less than a minute, it was still possible to discern some of their respective characteristics and personalities. "That bull," Will shook his head after another round. "Still got the same temper, always wanting to kill." Frederick silently watched the fighter, nicknamed Bull, leave the ring. He had just smashed his opponent's head with a hammer. The staff were busy cleaning the ring. "You have to be careful with him," Will said. "He loves to provoke his opponents, make them lose their composure, and he loves to brutalize them, not just in the ring, he loves to cause trouble outside of it." Frederick calmly asked, "If he annoys me outside of the ring, I'll kill him, right?" Will turned to look at him and said, He's a mad dog owned by the city's chief judge. No one wants to mess with a chief judge over a dog. Frederick just smiled and said nothing more. His intuition told him that because of his position as a clerk of the Wesson army, someone would target him. But that wasn't a problem. At worst, they could just send a Kirov airship over to blow him up. After the competition, Frederick and Olive returned home first, taking Thelma with them to a restaurant offering free meals. Thelma was even more familiar with the city's upscale restaurants than Olive. The tour guide had previously had the restaurant chefs come to his house to cook. Frederick chose a seafood restaurant, primarily for its proximity to his home. Upon arriving, they discovered that the hospitality standards varied depending on the level of the contestants. Half-star diners received cheaper meals, while six-star diners not only enjoyed exclusive rooftop seating but also a cabaret performance. Great dancing. Frederick praised the young men's local dances, forgetting to eat the shrimp and crabs Thelma and Olive had peeled for him. The dancers, several holding hands and raising their hands, performed a dance based on footwork, somewhat reminiscent of tap dancing. They stomped, kicked, stamped, and jumped to the cheerful rhythm of the musicians. The leader on the far left held a decorative sword inlaid with stained glass in his right hand, adding a unique touch of charm to the sword dance. After the dance, Frederick summoned the dance troupe's owner and rewarded them with a few gold coins. "If you want to make money, try Wesson," Frederick said to the owner. Such a cheerful dance would be popular there. The owner's expression suddenly changed, and he quickly shook his head in refusal. "We don't go to pagan lands," Frederick shrugged. "Whatever." He waved the dancers off and focused on his meal. This was by the sea, and the seafood was incredibly fresh. Fried prawns, boiled crabs, grilled fish, and seashells with fried rice, all of which Frederick thoroughly enjoyed in the comfortable sea breeze. Even more satisfying was Olive. She had never been to a restaurant like this before, and Frederick had let her eat as much as she wanted, nearly choking herself to death. As they were about to leave, a commotion erupted from the stairs. A group of people reached the rooftop. Frederick raised a brow. The leader was the bull he had met in the tournament. He was in his early 30s, incredibly muscular, with a facial scar and a menacing look. He was followed by several others, one of whom helped him hold the hammer he would use for today's competition. The bull walked up to Frederick, pointed at Thelma and asked, "How much do you want to sell this slave for? Name your price." Chapter 273. They are already dead. On the restaurant's rooftop, the atmosphere instantly became tense with the arrival of the uninvited guest. "Name your price." Manu glared at Seema with a lewd look. "You've had enough fun for so many days. It's my turn now." Tisk, tisk, tisk. One of the most beautiful women in Wanjing City. "I've been wanting to fuck her until she rolls her eyes for 10 years. Seema's face had turned pale, devoid of any color. Her hands clutched the hem of her skirt tightly, and she looked at Frederick with pleading eyes. Olive, already terrified, hid behind Frederick, trembling. Manu continued, "If you can't bear to leave, you can fuck her here again. I can even teach you how to do it." With that, he and his men erupted in lewd laughter. Frederick picked up a glass of orange juice from the table and said calmly, "Leave before I put it down, and I can pretend nothing happened." He then took a sip of the sweet and sour drink. Seeing that Manu was not willing to sell Seema to him easily, he stretched out his hand and his men immediately handed the hammer to him. Frederick sneered, put down the cup, and stomped his feet slightly. A black magic circle formed inside the floor under Manu and his men, and no one saw it. At this time, a gust of wind suddenly blew, and another person appeared on the rooftop. Will, who had met Frederick once in the morning, was holding a huge sword like a door panel in his hand. The floor shook with every step he took. "Manu," Will said in a deep voice, "give me some face and leave quickly. If things get out of hand, it will be bad for everyone." Frederick looked at Will curiously, wondering who this man was and why he was so prestigious. When Seema saw Will, she lowered her head and covered her face, not daring to look at him. Manu squinted at Will for a while, snorted coldly, and then left. Will breathed a sigh of relief, looked at Frederick, and said with some resignation, "I was originally going to ask you how you make happy water chicken wings, but I didn't expect to encounter this. Don't worry about the bull. My reputation still counts." Frederick took a sip from his drink and smiled, "I won't worry about those who are already dead." Will's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly said, "Please refrain from any extreme actions for the time being. You can do whatever you want after the samurai tournament is over." Frederick didn't comment and didn't mention the matter again. Instead, He carefully explained the happy water chicken wings recipe and bowed to take his leave. Will watched them leave, and as Frederick was about to leave, he whispered, "She's a good girl. Please treat her well." Frederick didn't react and left with Thelma and Olive. Back at their residence, Olive patted her chest and exclaimed, "Oh, I was so scared just now." Frederick simply smiled, patted the back of her head, and said softly, "You've been sweating so much? Go get some bath water and take a shower." Olive blushed and agreed, immediately heading upstairs. Seema stood beside Frederick, head bowed, hesitantly saying, "Master, today?" Frederick reached out and pinched her cheek, then said nonchalantly, "Why don't you help me take a bath?" Seema's face flushed bright red as she followed him upstairs. She tried to say something several times, but Frederick didn't give her the chance, ultimately sending her to bed early. The next day, before the second round began, Frederick still took Seema to the arena, worried that something might happen to her alone at home. Today's contestants were half the number compared to yesterday, and the waiting room was larger. Frederick was unlucky. Today's matches were extended to 20 minutes, with 4 sets per round, making the overall duration even longer. He was scheduled to compete during the hottest hours. Seema fanned herself in the lounge while Olive returned from fetching water, followed by Will. "What's going on with Manu and the others?" Will's expression was grave. They started losing their strength last night, and their bodies were practically covered in blisters. This morning, their skin was peeling off, and the flesh on their legs started to stink. Frederick replied calmly, "I told you yesterday they were dead." Will gave him a deep look before leaving. Frederick sneered and drank the warm water Olive offered him. He had used the necromancy spell, a common technique in Wesson State, typically used to sterilize food processing plants. Parts of the skin and superficial muscle had been destroyed, and the medical facilities available to them were incapable of treatment. In a private room in the arena, Will reported his recent meeting with Frederick to a young man in his early 20s, leaving out every detail. The young man simply waved him off without further instruction. This news quickly spread through the arena. In another private room, the local high judge's face was gloomy. Someone nearby said to him, "It's said that the soldiers in Wesson's army are all devils from hell. Everyone says that Charles Smith is one too, though he hasn't revealed his true identity yet." The high judge asked, "What do the priests of the Church of Flame say?" The subordinate hesitated, then said, "The hell the pagans talk about is what we call the tempering field, where warriors cultivate in the blazing fire to become divine weapons. Manu and his men have offended the divine weapons, so their skin is blistered as if burned." The high judge was speechless. According to the Church of Flame, after a brave warrior dies in battle, he is taken to the tempering field by the servants of the god of flame to cultivate in the blazing fire, eventually becoming a divine weapon under his command. Now that the priest said so, there was no way to retaliate by attacking the pagans. The Chief Justice thought for a moment and said to his men, "Send those 2 women over as slaves," calling it an apology. "Let them find an opportunity to kill him in a few days." Frederick, unaware of his own assessment, bragged to the other contestants until they were led off to their respective matches. As the sun rose higher and the temperature grew hotter, Olive muttered about saving money to buy an air conditioner and a fan when he returned to Wesson. Frederick suddenly remembered that his hometown had external combustion engine-powered fans around the 19th century and wondered if he could give them a try. Finally, the staff led Frederick off to the match. The contestant was a middle-aged man wielding a spear. His fighting style was methodical but lacked flexibility, and he could only draw against opponents of equal caliber. Frederick, preoccupied with a free iced happy water after his victory, didn't engage in excessive fighting. He found an opening and delivered a close-range uppercut to end the fight. Chapter 274 sold it. 128-64 round was over, but for the contestants aiming for the top spots, the real battle had just begun. The second day of the competition was Sunday, a day off for the contestants. Before retiring, a hearty meal was essential. Wow! Is that an air conditioner? The restaurant where Frederick and his friends were dining had an air conditioner installed in a private room on the second floor. Olive, upon entering, stood in front of it, blasting the cold air. Frederick went over and tapped her on the head, saying, "Stop it, or you'll get sick. Go close the window," just leaving it a crack. Olive, now obedient, immediately went over to close the window. Frederick checked the machine and turned the temperature to medium. He didn't like the air too cold. The restaurant specializes in barbecue, and the owner and Olive are distant relatives. Olive had previously worked there as a waitress, but was fired after being disliked by customers due to burns on her face. Now that she had secured a golden patron, she naturally wanted to show off. Frederick ignored her. Just as they finished ordering, a pair of sisters were brought over. "What do you mean?" Frederick asked. The man who looked like a butler said, "Yesterday, the bull offended your excellency, and the master has sent them here to make amends." He then presented Frederick with 2 slave contracts. The bull had died not long ago, and before dying, its flesh had given off a rotting smell, like meat left out at a market. The Chief Justice was terrified upon hearing the news, fearing this terrifying man would come after him, so he couldn't keep them. Frederick glanced at the slave contracts in his hand, then at the 2 identical, gracefully adorned girls before him. He asked, "Does giving them to me mean I can do anything with them?" The butler replied, "Yes, they are now your slaves, at your mercy." Frederick said calmly, "Very well, I'll take them." With that, he ignored the butler's presence and allowed the 2 girls to sit on his lap, one on each side. His hands began to restlessly flutter, a satisfied smile on his face. A satisfied smile crossed the butler's face, evidently because Frederick accepted his master's apology and was delighted with the 2 gifts. Throughout the meal, Frederick kept the 2 girls on his lap, feeding them, his hands constantly on the table. Thelma seemed oblivious, and Frederick told her to eat. Olive seemed a little displeased, but didn't show it. The 2 girls, on the other hand, were incredibly enthusiastic, using all their might to coax Frederick into laughter. After their meal, it was time to return. Frederick placed his arms around the 2 girls, one on each side, seemingly reluctant to let go. He turned and stumbled upon the slave market. He found the man who had sold Thelma to him. He assumed he was buying new stock and immediately greeted him warmly. Frederick pushed the 2 girls forward and said, "These 2 are yours." He then pulled the slave contracts from his pocket and tossed them over. The 2 girls, momentarily stunned, stared at Frederick in surprise. "Master, are you kidding? Master, what have we done wrong?" They had no idea they'd already been sold, just one afternoon after arriving at their target. The slave master's sharp eyes swept over the 2 items, understanding the situation. With a gesture, a group of strong men surrounded them, armed with clubs as thick as wrists, and several others with sturdy fishing nets. "This is difficult," the master said, looking troubled. "They're good, but they need training. 20 gold coins each, I guess." Frederick chuckled and shook his head. "They've all been trained as assassins since childhood. Just feel their muscles and you'll know. Look at their rings and earrings. Every one of them has a poison needle hidden inside. Those alone must be worth more than 20 gold coins. This isn't the first time we've done business with you. Give me a fair price." The 2 young assassins, fully aware that their identities had been exposed, immediately tried to escape. Climbing walls and houses was a fundamental skill for assassins. They could easily leap a floor or 2 from a single leap, and escape the encirclement without any problem. But the slave traders were prepared. Just as the 2 were about to jump, the nets were already deployed. As they were pulled to the ground, a group of strong men rushed over and beat them with clubs. Frederick, upon seeing this, shouted, "Hey! I won't accept the price cutting if you've damaged them." The slave owner replied, "Don't worry, we're professionals. 100 gold coins. Will you sell it?" Frederick agreed without hesitation. 100. A bargain for you. Anyone who could afford to sell Therma must have powerful connections. The 2 assassins were the local High Chancellor's men, so ordinary slave traders wouldn't dare take them, and they might not even be able to sell them elsewhere. Frederick took the purse, weighed it, and tossed a few extra coins back to the slave owner. He then left, taking Therma and Olive with him. As night fell, Frederick sat on his bed and counted the coins, piles of 10. Olive asked curiously, "Master, how did you know they were assassins?" Counting his coins, Frederick replied, "Just like I said this afternoon, I felt them. The muscles of a trained person are different from those of an untrained person. You can feel it by feeling. They're not like you. They feel like bones." Olive's face flushed. Because she was poor and often hungry, she was very thin and had little flesh on her body. Her hands and feet looked very slender, and the protrusions and curves were almost flat. When Frederick touched her, she could feel her bones bumping against his hand. She asked in a mosquito-like voice, "So, what kind of things do you like to touch, master?" Frederick smiled and replied, "All of them." He then placed 2 piles of 30 gold coins in front of Olive and Therma, respectively, and said, "These are for you." Therma was fine, having seen dozens of gold coins before, But Olive was dumbfounded. Not only gold, but even 30 silver coins placed together was unheard of. "Old master," Olive said, her words stuttering. "Are you really going to give it to me?" She had initially thought that this big boss would eventually give her 3 or 5 gold coins. If she helped the sailors with sewing and cooking on the ship when they sailed to Wesson, she could spend only 1 gold coin. The remaining money should be enough to support herself until she found a job. Frederick touched her head and said, "There are many places to spend money when you're away from home. Eating is cheap in Wesson, but renting a house is a bit expensive. It's safer to rent a nicer place by yourself. I suggest you enroll in a language school first, then go to a technical school run by the guild to learn a trade. With a skill, you'll never go hungry. If you don't want to go to a technical school, you can work on a sewing machine in a garment factory. There are cheap dormitories and a cafeteria there, and you can save some money over the year." Olive nodded repeatedly, tears welling in her eyes. Seema bit her lip, looking down at the gold coins before her. Finally, she made up her mind, hugged Frederick's waist, and whispered, "I want to go home soon." Frederick patted her on the back and said softly, "No problem." Seema was returning home to settle accounts with the enemies who had framed her father, and Frederick naturally supported her, seeing no reason to obstruct her. The next day, Olive went to the market to help Seema buy travel supplies and weapons, as well as plenty of rations for the journey. Seema's journey home was long, requiring her to travel with a caravan. Olive also helped her contact a caravan along the way and purchased a batch of small, high-priced goods, such as sewing needles, imported from Wesson, to conceal her identity. From the moment Seema decided to leave, she and Frederick engaged in a final, frenzied struggle. On the morning of the round of 64, Frederick took Olive to the tournament grounds, and Seema began her journey home. Frederick looked back at Therma's departing figure. Neither of them expected that when they met again, Therma would ask Frederick, "Do you regret not killing me then?" Chapter 275 The third round. Bang! Hammers with 2 hammers the size of microwave ovens smashed into the scabbard, sending Frederick flying back over 10 meters. From the third round onward, no contestant could be taken lightly. Those who had initially concealed their abilities now showed their true strength. Frederick stood still and carefully studied his opponent. Before the match, she had been a legal Lolita, about 1.4 meters tall. The moment she struck, she instantly transformed into a giant, 3-meter-tall Lolita. The thick spear in her hand had transformed into a one-handed hammer, its head a solid magical rock. Her once loose spider silk robe had become a somewhat revealing tights. But that wasn't the end. A suit of rock armor had appeared on her. While not as strong as a tin can, it still protected her vitals. Frederick took his time. This kind of opponent with enhanced physical strength and exceptional defense was a formidable opponent. He had little room for error. A single unguarded blow could be disastrous. The sword unsheathed, emitting a blue glow. In the plush, comfortable stands, a young man asked Wheel, "Who is that woman?" Wheel quickly replied, "Your Majesty, her name is Carly, from the Lineage region. Rumors say she's a member of the Witch Sisterhood." A series of deafening clashes erupted from the battlefield. Frederick swung his sword, and the opponent countered with a heavy hammer. The collision of wind and earth elements caused a violent explosion. Despite her enormous size, Carly was incredibly agile, intercepting Frederick's numerous slashes with her counterattacks. The inertia generated by the powerful swing of a heavy weapon can easily cause a person to follow the weapon's movements, leaving the opponent vulnerable if they dodge. Frederick, taking advantage of this, maneuvered around the ring, tempting the opponent to swing wildly, then counterattack when the opponent lost control of the weapon after the strike. He exploited a gap just before the opponent's attack, bringing the hammer down on his head, intending to retreat, then strike back at close range when the hammer impacted the ground. But Carly's didn't use her full strength, her control of the weapon perfect. After Frederick dodged, the hammer didn't crash to the ground. Instead, it suddenly rose, palm height above the ground, like a sword, stabbing Frederick as he leaped. Frederick's position was poor, so he could only jump to the side to avoid the frontal attack. But Carly's, with swift movements and maneuvers, swung the hammer across, on the verge of striking Frederick's waist. Bang! The sound of the hammer colliding with the scabbard was faint. Carly's face was grim. The previous blow hadn't felt like a hit. A word came to her mind: force dissipation. Frederick had just used force dissipation to neutralize the hammer's force, but he nearly flew out of the ring. The round of 32, which began today, was a one-on-one match, lasting 1 hour. Being knocked out of the ring resulted in a loss. Frederick made a strategic adjustment. The opponent's transformations and the use of elementally shaped armor and weapons consumed mana, forcing her to consume it faster. He leaped high as a 3-story building, his sword and scabbard entwined in lightning, both slashing towards his opponent's head. Seeing this, Carlyle seized the opportunity and swung her great hammer at Frederick's weapon. Just as the weapons were about to collide, Frederick strangely shifted mid-air. Glancing over the hammer and landing, his sword and scabbard simultaneously slashing at his opponent's unprotected armpits. Carlyle hurriedly parried, using the rock armor behind her to block the scabbards, while the handle of the great hammer blocked the swords. The hammer handle was wrapped in a layer of rock, blocking the electric current from the swords. The scabbard struck her back hard, shattering a large piece of the rock armor. Frederick glanced at the shattered rock armor and became alert, as thin steel bars were embedded in the rock, enhancing its overall defense. Such reinforced concrete wall magic is a type of composite magic, requiring a high level of skill in at least 2 magic branches. Being a skilled magician in Wessenland is not a problem. The new situation prompted Frederick to adjust his tactics slightly. His opponent was clearly capable of using gold. If he replaced his rock armor and hammer with gold, it would be even more difficult to defeat him. He had to prevent her from switching gears and at least defeat her here. The next moment, Frederick launched a torrent of attacks, transforming his scabbard, which had previously served as a defensive tool, into a weapon. Carlyle, relying on her armor for protection, counterattacked, but Frederick made minimal dodging, several of her attacks narrowly missing her. The counterattacks, aimed at her unprotected parts, forced him to parry back, preventing further attacks. The audience erupted in cheers. They were waiting for this kind of relentless, thrilling match. Many contestants stood at the entrance, closely observing every detail. Will sighed, "This match is worthy of the semifinals. I didn't expect Carlyle to have been conserving her strength, and now she's facing him." The young man beside him whispered, "Charles Smith, Carlyle, no matter who wins, you must befriend them. This operation requires talent like them." Will immediately obeyed. In the ring, Carlyle found herself losing ground. Her opponent's relentless close-quarters attacks strained their defenses, and the constant shattering and repairing of her rock armor drained their energy. A change of tactics was necessary. Frederick remained remarkably calm, employing the same mindset he'd employed in sparring with Richardnell. He not only monitored his opponent's every move, but also observed any changes on the empty ring around him. Carlyle seized an opportunity, raised her hammer with both hands, and blocked Frederick's blow before bringing it down with a fierce blow. At the same moment, a dense mass of steel spikes suddenly appeared on the surrounding ring floor, gleaming coldly in the blazing sun. Like a porcupine's back, the spikes pointed towards Frederick, threatening to collide with him if he dodged. Frederick, thinking this was the decisive moment, suddenly slid in without a run-up, aiming for the opponent's right leg. Carlyle, caught off guard, was not off balance, her form distorted, and the hammer crashed down onto the empty ground. Frederick dropped to his scabbard, grasped his opponent's right leg with his left hand, and, using the force of his own rise, flung her up. Carlyle, seemingly thrown from her position, leaped onto her left leg, its rock-clad leg slashing towards Frederick's head. Frederick extended his right hand, but Carlyle's left leg struck him hard on the arm. Crack! The referee and the other competitors at the entrance heard the sound of a broken bone. Give up. At this point, a broken bone was no different from a beaten defeat. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.